Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy today's episode.
Flicking her wrist, she created several tall pillars of ice on the buildings which are more dangerous. Alara instantly recognized the marked buildings as the ones that housed the drugs. She did spend the night memorizing the entire map she had gotten from the mysterious person after all. Focus on those buildings first, she shouted out. She didn't want to use her hellfire bombardment just yet since she doesn't know what might happen if it comes into contact with the drugs. If it reacts and disperses into the air, it would be a complete disaster for Kairosa. I'll take this chance to get some kills for my title, she thought whilst tapping her necklace. For swords appeared around her as a few of the adventurers recognized it to be the purple set equipment sold at the auction. She's managed to pass the weapons trial? Someone shouted out in surprise. After the auction, a staff had released information about the trial online, and they had laughed about what a waste the weapon was. Trying to control the swords whilst being bombarded by attacks wasn't an easy task, especially since they weren't allowed to use their magic either. However, seeing Shiro summon the swords which radiated with a dangerous light caused them to grit their teeth in jealousy. If a little girl could do it, why couldn't I? They thought to themselves. But when Shiro glared back at the few who had looked at her with jealous, they quickly shifted their eyes away. Che, cowards. Shiro scorned slightly. What did you say? One of them shouted back as he just heard her ridicule him. Oh, you can hear me? Shiro widened her eyes. Do you think I'm deaf? Of course I can hear you. He gritted his teeth. His response only caused Shiro to smile since this means she could communicate without her phone. Ha 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 ha. The crowd was stunned hearing Shiro's laugh as some even slipped from a moment of distraction. Her voice was like a gentle breeze that relaxed their entire body and trapped them in its wonder. This miss can finally talk. She grinned. Don't ignore M-. He was cut off when he saw Shiro suddenly appear in front of him. Her sword rested on his neck as her emotionless eyes bore into his. This miss is in a good mood right now. Do you want to ruin it? She spoke, blandly. The man paled as sweat dripped off his back. He couldn't even react to her approaching him. Now that she had her blade to his neck, he had less of a chance to survive if he should fight her. And no. Good boy. Shiro smiled before jumping away. I thought you were mute? Alara asked suspiciously. Turns out my voice is back. Shiro shrugged. Then I suppose congratulations are in order. Thank you. Seeing the two beauties talk casually whilst killing any faction member that had approached them, the adventurers couldn't help but feel like the two were on a stroll rather than cleaning out a dangerous faction. Even though they couldn't see the entirety of Shiro's face, just from her figure, voice, and eyes, they knew she was beautiful. Even Alara felt a little defeated since her opponent was only 13 as well. That meant there were plenty of time for her to grow up and gain more of an adult charm. So how about we have a small chat about cooperation after this? We shall see. I still need to meet up with my friends and level up after all, Shiro replied with a soft chuckle. Indeed. I have to say though, you've changed quite a bit since the last time I saw you at the auction, Alara said as she couldn't help but admire Shiro's skin condition. It was as if it was a blank sheet of snow, soft and cold to the touch. If only she knew. Since she was a fire mage, she could feel the coldness that radiated from Shiro, suggesting her prowess as an ice mage. Don't remind me of change. Shiro rolled her eyes slightly as she could still remember how much Madison had changed after her class just. Amen? That being said, Alara seems to have quite the bust as well, Shiro thought whilst glaring at Alara's breasts. What's wrong? Alara asked as she covered her chest. From the way Shiro looked at them, it was as if she was a hunter that was about to kill a prey. Ever feel like they're a hindrance? Maybe work them into pecs will help with combat, she replied whilst still glaring at the breasts. A faction member tried to sneak up on her, but she killed him with a single swing of her sword. I'm a mage. I don't need muscle power. Oh, but you know, having physical power is good for survival. It's not like the lumps of fat does anything after all. You can still breastfeed with smaller breasts. I can't exactly change them though. Maybe surgery will do. And that's my cue to leave. Goodbye. Alara replied as she hastily left the area. Any longer, and she felt like there would be no turning back. Amen. Shiro only nodded slightly before jumping up to the tallest building in the area. Looking around at the surroundings, she could see signs of combat slowly converging towards the center of the slums. Seems like they're making good progress, Shiro thought to herself. Asterisk boom. Too soon. Feeling the mana that exploded outwards near the center of the slums, she could tell that the high levels are making a move. And as she had expected, 3 people appeared on the roof. 2 women and a man. The first woman had long black hair with green highlights, while the other had pale blue hair. Their figures were rather similar, including the face. Could they be twins? Shiro thought to herself, since the only difference between them would be the hair. If your faction didn't try to make the King drug, do you think the city would make a move? The blue woman shouted with a glare. Don't blame me when it was your faction who leaked the intel. The black-haired woman scoffed. Ladies dash. Shut the CK up, Eric. They both shouted out. URG. Che, let's just kill all of them now and move to a new city. It's not like Mother said we had to settle our difference in just this city. But this would have been over if you didn't pull something as stupid as developing that drug. Watching the 3 nonchalantly talk whilst blatantly releasing their mana pressure, Shiro narrowed her eyes and used Shadow Cloak to get closer. Liana LVL 78, Tainted Poison Master. Lieni LVL 76, Corrupted Frost Monarch. Eric LVL 77, Dread Reaper. Liana was the one with black hair and green highlights, whilst Lieni was the one with blue hair. As for Eric, he seemed rather plain. But to Shiro, he felt the most danger. Since his class has the title Reaper, that means he is closely related to the death element. Annoying, she thought. While Lieni might be within her limits due to her control over ice, Liana and Eric would kill her with a single slap. Of course, that was considering the fact that she didn't use the Calamity Dragon scales that would boost her power up to Tier 3. Once that happens, she'll be able to eliminate the 3 of them quickly. But as it stands, she had no chance against them. Just use your poison already, Liana. It's not like the city has a cure for it, Lieni said whilst crossing her hands. She made a sitting motion and an ice chair appeared under her. Eric only took a step back and waited for Liana to do her thing. Tisk. Clicking her tongue in annoyance, Liana gathered mana into her palms and raised it up. Her eyes glowed with a dim green, whilst a 3-fold magic circle appeared in the air. Shiro frowned when she saw the circle, since poison-type mages were the worst kind of opponent to fight against. Depending on their proficiency, one could even get poisoned just by being in their presence. However, due to the fact that she had received the Calamities Will Augment in one of the trials, she had certain resistances to poison. While only limited to Tier 2, it was just enough for her to stay in Liana's presence without being poisoned. Of course, this could also be attributed to the fact that her proficiency with poison hadn't reached an extreme point yet. Well, this is out of my limits, so the elders can take care of this, Shiro thought to herself whilst evacuating the area. And as she had guessed, not long after the magic circle appeared, 4 elders charged towards the trio with weapons in hand. Seems like the 4 of them are rather enthusiastic, Shiro muttered whilst glancing back occasionally. She could see Liana being able to hold her own against 2 elders, whilst Lieni and Eric both 2-1 each. As for her suspicion about Eric, it was proven right, since he held a scythe made from shadows. The scythe would shift around with thin hands that would reach out to restrict his opponent. Not only that, the scythe could also take the form of other weaponry. Even with her Fated Snow movement and Rift Walker, it would be annoying to be caught by those hands. The moment that happens, it would be game over for her due to the disparity of their stats. Not only that, he may possess more skills that could kill her with a single swipe. Reaching the edge of the cage, Shiro was allowed to leave after presenting her ID card. The surrounding adventurers glared at her with scorn, but she glared back. This caused the adventurers to pale and quickly look away. Now that I have my voice back, I should surprise Lyrica and Madison. Shiro chuckled slightly at the thought of trolling her friends. Shiro, I've come back from my trials and helped out a little with clearing out the slums. Where are you now? Lyrica, We're in the city center. The Adventurers Guild has opened up a few floors to house the refugees for now. You'll find us on the 12th floor. Shiro, all right, I'm coming now. Making her way to the Adventurers Guild, Shiro used the elevators to arrive at the 12th floor. Before she entered the room, she used First Phantom and waited for someone else to open the door so that she could enter the room without anyone noticing. Giving the room a quick glance, she was able to find Lyrica and Madison almost immediately. Everyone else that was in the tent was also with them. Naturally, that included Kane. Grinning slightly, Shiro sneaked up behind the duo. Shiro said she'll be here soon, so where is she? Lyrica muttered whilst checking the time. Shouldn't be too long. Shirone said she'll come so naturally she'll be here soon. I know that, but it shouldn't take this long just to arrive. Kane's right, you know. I'm already here. Shiro grinned and popped her head between the three of them. And carat pound, dollar and percent pound dollar. Lyrica, Madison, and Kane cried out in shock seeing Shiro suddenly appear. Whilst they were screaming, both Lyrica and Madison sent a fist towards her on instinct. However, it was blocked easily by Shiro. Shirone, Kane cried out after recognizing Shiro. While there was some changes such as her height, her eyes and her features becoming sharper, she knew it was Shiro. Hugging Shiro by the neck, Kane accidentally strangled Een, who was resting in Shiro's hood. She was dreaming of eating mana stones when a huge mana stone suddenly appeared and crushed her. Asterisk chirp. Sorry, Een. Kane quickly apologized and let go. Een groggily poked her head out of the hood before resting her body on Kane's head. At least if she rested here, there would be less of a chance to get strangled in her sleep. Shiro, you can talk now? Madison asked in surprise. Yep. After completing my trial, I can talk now. Shiro smiled and pulled down her hood and mask. Lyrica, who was already entranced by her voice, widened her eyes when she saw Shiro's face. The charm that it radiated was unlike before. It was more dominating in an aspect, while the black irises were a little off-putting since it made her a little unreadable. It was overshadowed by her charm. Asterisk bang. She collapsed. Madison muttered as she looked past Shiro and saw Lyrica laying on her back. Why does she always do that? Is my face really that shocking? Shiro frowned slightly and touched her jaw. You really have no idea, do you? Madison raised an eyebrow. Idea of what? Shiro furrowed her brows since she wasn't too familiar with what girls do in their teenage years. While she did experience a little of it before being captured by the scientists, she had forgotten about it due to her memories focusing more on the slightly traumatic events. Well, traumatic is pushing it a bit, I guess. Shiro mused to herself. As for Madison, all she could do was facepalm and hope for the best. So how did you fix your voice? Madison asked whilst taking a sip of some juice. She couldn't help but repeatedly take a glance at Shiro's face. I'm not too sure. Maybe because I got my 5th star? Shiro shrugged with a small smile. Wow. Madison couldn't help but think, seeing that smile. I guess we don't have to wait till C-class for your then, huh? Lucky. Indeed. So what was this surprise that you wanted me to see? Shiro asked. About that. We were going to tell you, but it was kind of cut short due to the whole slum situation. Is that so? Leaning back a little, Shiro threw her last mana stone lollipop in her mouth and frowned. Say, why don't we hit up a dungeon or something? I need to get some mana stones for little Een. She's running out of food. And so am I, Shiro thought since this was her last meal. You need D-rank mana stone? I got some here. Me and Lyrica had been in the dungeons for the past few days, so I got some spare. Is it okay? Yeah, just take them. It's not like we're low on cash. Madison waved her hand lightly. Accepting the mana stones, Shiro got 2 and threw it lightly towards Een. Asterisk mafu. Kane. What is it, Shirone? Why are you latching onto the back of my head like a koala? Shiro asked with a weary smile. Because Shirone is like a cold pillow? Kane replied as her eyes started to close. Aya, you're drooling. Shiro cried out in slight panic and quickly pulled Kane off the moment she felt saliva run down her hair. Sorry. Kane quickly apologized since it was so comfy for her to hug Shiro that she almost fell asleep. Don't worry about it. Just try not to drool, okay? Shiro patted her head and sat her between her legs. Waving her hand slightly, Shiro froze the saliva in her hair with ease and crumbled it to dust. Seems like your control over ice has improved. Madison complimented, seeing how effortless it was. Obviously, otherwise I wouldn't be a 5-star ice mage, would I? URG. Ohaya? Seems like Lyrica's waking up, Shiro said whilst looking over at Lyrica's direction. Maddie? I just had the wildest dream. Shiro appeared behind us and she could talk. Strange, huh? She replied whilst rubbing her eyes. Yo, it's not a dream. Fufu. This miss has her voice back. Shiro grinned while giving her a little wave. Lyrica looked at Shiro and pulled her cheek to make sure she wasn't dreaming. What happened to your face, and did the trial fix your voice? It's kind of like what happened to Maddie, I suppose. When I finished the trial, my body experienced a change. As for my face, maybe I got a hidden charm stat? Ha ha ha. Shiro chuckled. Alpha Nigeria Niruk Epsilon. What happened to your eyes then, and what about that crest on your hand? Lyrica asked curiously. Previously, her blue eyes were like the sky, full of curiosity. However, after her trial, her eyes was like an endless void that caused one to not know what she was thinking about. But that only made Lyrica want to find out more. She wanted to reach the end of that void and see what she was thinking about. Well, I don't really have control over my eyes changing. As for my crest, they're a reward I got from the trial. I can control all the ice around me regardless of who created it. So you're saying, if an enemy used ice against you, you can steal it? Madison widened her eyes in shock. She knew the 5th star was strong since hardly anyone managed to reach the 5th star in the history of the current world. However, she didn't think it would be so powerful. The fact that they couldn't use ice against Shiro meant she was the perfect counter to all ice mages, even more so than fire mages. Yup. Shiro smiled. Asterisk bang. Their conversation was cut short when something crashed into the side of the building. Naturally, Shiro instantly entered combat mode and flicked her wrist the moment she felt the building move. Ice wrapped around them and protected them from any debris that tried to crush them. Of course, she didn't forget to protect Kane's mom and the other tent mates. Narrowing her eyes, Shiro saw that it was a bloodied woman with blue hair. It's Lienni, she thought with narrowed eyes. Get out of here, Shiro said quietly, not wanting to startle Lienni. Even though her control over ice had improved significantly, she wasn't arrogant enough to think that she could suppress Lienni enough so that none of the bystanders would be affected. A fight between high levels would also cause a huge amount of destruction. The only exception is when one side is suppressed to the point where they can't retaliate. Pardon? Get out of here, Shiro repeated sternly. Lyrica and Madison nodded their heads and grabbed Kane. Een flapped her wings and landed on Shiro's head. Her face was also serious since their lives are linked. If Shiro dies, she dies as well. Glancing back slightly, Lyrica and Madison saw who Shiro was looking at and paled. A level 76 corrupted frost monarch. They thought with shock. Before their tent mates could even cry out in surprise, the duo had grabbed everyone and dashed out. Their actions caught the attention of Lienni. Che, that geezer should be coming soon. A few hostages should be fine, she said and aimed her palm at the group. Before the ice tendrils could even reach them, Shiro dashed in front of the attack and swiped left with her hand. Asterisk boom. Lienni was shocked, feeling her ice magic being ripped from her grasp. Narrowing her eyes at Shiro, who tapped her necklace and summoned 4 swords, Lienni knew Shiro was the biggest threat in the room. However, before she could even decide what to do, Shiro had already started to attack her. I need to restrain her for a short time, Shiro thought to herself, since she couldn't allow Kane to see a scene of carnage just yet. She was too young, and as her big sister, she won't allow it. All she needed to do was to buy enough time for the person who sent her flying to arrive. Once he arrived, her job would be finished. Lienni tried to block the 4 swords with her ice magic once more, but that was a mistake. Ice domain. With a simple click of her fingers, The ice spread apart like a blooming flower and exposed Lienyi to the swords. "Don't get cocky," she shouted out in anger and reached out for the swords. Raising her palm, Lienyi sent out a pulse of mana which caused Shiro to widen her eyes in shock. Riftwa. Asterisk bang. Gah. Her body was launched backwards from the pulse and smashed against the wall. Coughing up some blood, Shiro gritted her teeth and stood back up. She had opted for Rift Walker instead of Fated Snow Movement since she would still be launched back. Fated Snow Movement would only turn a small portion of her body into snow. The mana pulse Lienyi had sent out hit her entire body rather than just a small part. However, she wasn't able to enter the rift quick enough, so her body had to suffer the damage. Thankfully, she was also making some mana absorption equipment with her nanotech armor creation skill as a backup. If not for that, she would literally be on her breath. "Since you can control ice, I might as well use mana on its own, you brat." Lienyi gnashed her teeth in annoyance. The humiliation of being suppressed, even just for a moment by her, wasn't a feeling she was going to tolerate. Not to mention, they were 31 levels apart. What was the strangest occurrence was that she was still alive after all that. "Hee, might want to look behind you." Shiro grinned. "HM." Suddenly sensing something approaching fast, Lienyi turned around and raised her palms quickly. A three-fold magic circle appeared in front of her and erected a multi-layered ice shield. However, all would have been fine if not for the fact that Shiro was nearby. "Break," she commanded and clenched her fist. Asterisk ping. On her command, the ice shattered apart, causing Lienyi to glare at her in anger. Asterisk boom. A golden arrow pierced Lienyi's shoulder and ripped her left arm out of its sockets. T. Quickly drinking a potion, her arm started to regenerate. She couldn't stay here for long. "Just you wait," she threatened before her body started to turn to ice. "Did you forget what I can do?" Shiro smirked and flexed her finger at Lienyi once more. $, $, Cursing out loud, Lienyi had to resort to reinforcing her body in order to run away. Chuckling to herself, Shiro coughed up a bit of blood again. "Che, the hit of a level 76 really isn't something one should take," Shiro muttered whilst wiping away the blood on her lips. One of the elders appeared not too long after with a golden bow in hand. "Thanks." He nodded to Shiro since he was grateful for her actions. While he didn't know what she did, he knew she had a part in taking down Lienyi's shield due to his amazing eyesight. Watching him dash away, Shiro couldn't help but blink. "He actually took the time to thank me before continuing the chase?" she muttered just to make sure. "Stupid." Shiro clicked her tongue. While she did appreciate his thoughts, that just allowed Lienyi more time to escape. She would rather him kill Lienyi than to thank her. Shaking her head, Shiro healed herself with the fire of life. During their short contact, most of the people had managed to evacuate except for a few slowpokes. Looking up at the cracking ceiling, Shiro narrowed her eyes since this may cause the building to topple. Placing her palm on the wall, Shiro flared her mana and used Glacial Touch. Freeze. *KRRR. Ice encased the room in an instant and started to fix the gap caused by Lienyi's crash. It was only after she was sure that the building wasn't going to collapse did she stop. "Che, they should be more careful," she muttered. If there was no one to make some support pillars for the building, the entire place could have collapsed onto the street of Kairosa. Leaving the room, Shiro saw Lyrica, Madison, and Kene waiting for her. "I swear, danger always comes to you," Madison couldn't help but point out. "Unlucky maybe? I've had worse." Shiro shrugged. Compared to her last life, this life could be described as pretty lax. She didn't need to worry about Tier 5 adventurers suddenly appearing and challenging her. There were a few times where she would be relaxing on her day off and a group of level 200+ would suddenly attack her. Naturally, they were all dealt with accordingly. What can be worse than fighting a person 31 levels ahead of you? They thought in their minds. Well, forget about that for now. From what I can see, they should be finishing up the slums pretty soon, Shiro said whilst checking up on her phone for any news. Since Lienyi, one of the bosses of the factions, was pushed back this far. That meant the other members shouldn't be any better. Yesy, there are updates on final cleanups. Shall we join in? Shiro smiled and licked her lips a little. Madison suddenly felt a huge amount of pity for the faction members. If they were lucky, they would die quickly. If they're unlucky, they may lose something else before dying. That is if they hadn't lost it yet. She wasn't one to judge. You can also say this is a great time for you to gain EXP and level up. Shiro continued. Fine, I'm in. Lyrica nodded since this was a good chance for her to get used to fighting against other humans. Can I join? I want to get stronger too, so I can follow Shirone. They say EXP is used for level ups, so I want to get some too. Kane said whilst holding onto Shiro's arms. Now you see, you'll do that when you're older. Shiro smiled, trying to pacify Kane. She didn't want to expose her to murder just yet. But I'm old now. I'll get my class soon and I'll fight as well. Kane replied. How about this? I'll take you out to get some EXP when you get your class. Fine. Kane pouted since she didn't want to cause too much trouble for Shiro. Fufu, good girl. I'll be back soon. Shiro smiled before looking towards Lyrica and Madison. Let's go. ####. In the end, Shiro managed to raise up her kill count all the way to 230, but was only able to level up once, much to her disappointment. However, it wasn't too surprising since the majority of the enemies were low-leveled cannon fodder. Only 4 more levels till level 50. Shiro muttered while looking up at the sky. The scene would have been stunning if not for the fact that she was sitting on top of a frozen corpse mountain. Then again, it was still stunning but in a different way. Is that everyone? Lyrica asked whilst looking around. It should be. That being said, I don't think they'll want to approach the area seeing as though I've made a small monument for them. Shiro smiled whilst patting the frozen corpse mountain. Right. That would dissuade them from approaching. Lyrica smiled wearily seeing Shiro's combat prowess soar once more. AI, don't look at me like that. Both you and Madison have improved a lot. I mean, look at your levels. You've practically caught up to me now. Shiro chuckled slightly. Both Lyrica and Madison had reached level 44, which is only 2 levels under her. Whatever they did in the dungeon for several days must have paid off. Let's go back now, Shiro said as she hopped off the corpse mountain. Since we're all close to level 50, we should push for level 50 plus dungeons to get more EXP. Speaking of dungeons, we want you to meet someone. As for the time, how about tomorrow morning? Lyrica suggested. Sure. I'm rather curious about what you want me to see. Shiro nodded her head after a short pause. ####. The next day, Shiro waited at a coffee store while Lyrica and Madison went off to bring her the surprise. Are you sure this is okay? Yeah, it's fine. Trust us. But it's going to be awkward. AI, don't be like that. You wouldn't know if you don't try. Her ears perked up hearing some hushed whispers. She could recognize 2 of them being Lyrica and Madison while the third one was a little unfamiliar. However, she knows that she's heard that voice before. No way, Shiro muttered as she had a candidate in mind. Turning her head over, she saw Sylvia standing awkwardly while the duo inched her towards the table. Hi, Sylvia greeted. Shiro felt a twitch creep up on her lips and raised an eyebrow. Why did the hi become a question? She thought. Hi, it seems like the 2 of you have some explaining to do, Shiro said and turned towards the duo. You can talk now? Sylvia widened her eyes in shock. Yeah, I'm not explaining the story for the 3rd time. You 2 can bring her up to speed. Shiro shrugged and decided to go for some coffee. Gesturing towards a waitress, Shiro waited patiently. What would you like? The waitress asked. Coffee, please. What kind? What kind? Shiro was a little taken aback since she was just used to saying coffee please and getting some coffee. What types are there? Well, we have a variety. A latte, cappuccino, espresso, F-. Can you just give me a regular coffee? Shiro asked since she couldn't taste it to begin with. She just wanted something to drink while waiting for the 2 to explain the story. So I'm guessing you want latte then? Sure, just go with that. Shiro nodded. Not too long after, Shiro's coffee arrived and the duo had just explained the entire story to them. So you've managed to reach 5 stars. Congratulations. Thank you. Seeing how formal and awkward the two of them were being, Lyrica and Madison looked at each other before sighing. I swear. Basically, the gist of the situation is that Sylvia wants to join our party, Madison said as she got straight to the point. Maddie. Sylvia panicked seeing Madison say it so bluntly. Is that all? Sure. Shiro nodded. Since Sylvia wanted to join, she would welcome her with open arms. Naturally, if she had any thoughts about harming the party, she would end her in an instant. What do you mean, We told you Shiro would be okay with it. Lyrica rolled her eyes a little. But dash. No os or buts. Well, you three can do whatever you want. Sylvia is an exception. Just don't start bringing random people to the party, Shiro said whilst she finished the rest of her coffee. Of course. Who do you think we are? No random person can join our party. Madison nodded. Good. Since Sylvia is joining, we'll have some slight changes to our plans. We'll be challenging the level 55 dungeon instead. The three of them widened their eyes in shock. Didn't you say level 50 before? Lyrica asked. That's only because we didn't have a healer. Now that Sylvia is here, you think I'll let you girls slack off by giving you an easy dungeon? Now get your asses ready. We're going to the level 55 dungeon. Shiro grinned and walked away. Say, don't you think Shiro's become more dominating now that she has her voice back? Sylvia couldn't help but ask. Previously, since she had to use her phone, she couldn't take command. However, not that she had her voice back. Her sadistic side seemed to be showing a bit more. Hee. Lyrica only giggled at Shiro's actions. What? Sylvia couldn't help but think, seeing the blush on Lyrica's face. Don't worry about it. Lyrica's Shiro syndrome seemed to have gotten worse after Shiro came back from her trials. Madison replied with a fatigued sigh. Right? Sylvia replied whilst occasionally glancing back at Lyrica. ####. The trio of Lyrica, Madison, and Sylvia was currently running away from a giant dinosaur-like monster that had been chasing them. Don't just shout. Kill it. Shiro called out after them. Why did you provoke it? They retorted since there was a huge ice rod poking out from the dinosaur's ass. Don't mind the small details. I just want to see how you three work as a team. Shiro grinned. Currently, Shiro was resting her body on a large tree branch. Laying on her stomach, she rested her chin on her hand, whilst her feet would swing back and forth. She had a playful grin on her face as she watched the dinosaur chase after the trio. The three of them looked at each other and decided to fight the dinosaur. You know what to do. Madison nodded as the three of them turned around. Black mist enveloped Madison while Lyrica used her Rose Blossom skill set. Attack Demon Knight. Rose Blossom. Blood Thorns. Stabbing her sword into the ground, Lyrica bit her finger and drew a rune in the space in front of her. A portion of her HP was drained away as blood-red thorns shot out of the ground and latched onto the dinosaur. A HP siphoning skill that requires the user to sacrifice some of their HP first, Interesting. Shiro thought with a smile. Analyzing the skill, Shiro had an idea of what it could do. I'm guessing Blood Thorns needs the user to sacrifice some HP to summon the thorns. After being summoned, the thorns will not only siphon away the HP of the enemy, but also restrain them whilst this was happening. As for Madison, after shifting into her attack demon mode, she readied her greatsword and nodded to Sylvia. Blessing, Sylvia commanded. A golden magic circle expanded out from under her and encased the duo in a golden glow. Feeling power run through her body, Madison crouched down and dashed towards the dinosaur. Slashing at the head, she hoped that it would end the beast in one go. However, a bone armor extended out from the skin and wrapped around the head. Crack. While her greatsword did mage to create a fracture on the bone armor, it was just a little short from breaking it. Don't hummy, run. Lyrica shouted out and grabbed Madison by the neck. After that last hit, She could feel the monster becoming enraged. Asterisk boom. The skin on the dinosaur started to turn dark red as neon yellow energy flickered off his body. Watch out, it is a lightning element. Shiro warned casually. She believes that the three have enough firepower to kill the dinosaur in front of them. And even if they were in danger, she had already placed several safe measures on their bodies without them realizing. Defense Demon Knight. Shifting her greatsword into a giant shield, Madison gritted her teeth since she could feel the mana gathering towards the dinosaur's mouth. When a monster gathers mana towards their mouth, it can only mean one thing: a breath attack. A dark red magic circle swirled around Madison's shield. Closing her eyes for a short moment, Madison activated her new skill. Defense Demon Skill, Demon Fortress. As her skill started to take the form of a giant fortress, the dinosaur stomped down heavily and opened its jaw. Asterisk boom. A giant beam of lightning shot out of the dinosaur's mouth and smashed against the illusionary fortress. Asterisk boom. Gah! Madison was forced back a few steps as cracks could be seen on the fortress itself. Thankfully, the breath attack didn't last long since the dinosaur puffed out a cloud of smoke before charging towards them again. Madison couldn't move as well since her body had to sustain some of the damage. Raising up her staff, Sylvia cast a healing art on Madison and healed her up almost instantly.
Thanks.
Madison called out and charged towards the monster with her shield in hand. Jumping up, she twisted her body and slammed her shield against the dinosaur's head. While her strength right now was crazily high for her level, it wasn't enough to overpower a C-class monster. However, this was part of her plan. Attack Demon Knight. Using the momentum of the dinosaur throwing his head back to get her off, Madison swung her greatsword and cleaved upwards. Asterisk Ura. The dinosaur cried out in pain as his jaw was split in two due to Madison's uppercut. While the dinosaur's attention was focused on Madison, Sylvia had stacked several buffs on Lyrica that increase her power across the board. The edge of her blade glowed with a reddish-silver glow. Thousand Blade Aura plus Willow Blade Aura. Activating both her berserk skills, Lyrica charged towards the dinosaur and swung towards the already wounded jaw. Burning Lotus. Asterisk boom. Several sword lights pierced through the jaw, stabbed through the dinosaur's flesh, and finally pierced the brain. The trio kept their guard up whilst glaring at the dinosaur. Its body shook for a moment before the light in his eyes dimmed. Asterisk bang. The weight of his body and the force of impact against the floor caused a small cloud of dust to appear. Asterisk cough cough cough. Finally, Lyrica said after coughing for a short moment due to the dust. Good job, Shiro praised. They were about to react happily but paled when they saw her sadistic grin. Now take on two of them. She continued as two more dinosaurs charged out the jungle with ice spears poking out their ass. Hashtag hashtag hashtag. Ha ha ha. The trio panted heavily whilst laying on the floor. Every time they killed a monster, Shiro would provoke a few more for them to kill. Naturally, the number never surpassed two, but the pressure of having to constantly fight meant Sylvia had to heal almost on instinct. The moment either Lyrica or Madison was about to suffer from fatigue, she would cast a spell to rejuvenate them. Of course, this also meant her technique improved substantially. Not bad at all. Shiro nodded in approval. She was satisfied with Sylvia's performance. After all, the healer was one of the most important roles in a party. If the healer was bad, the party would eventually crumble. They couldn't have a weak link. Of course, if Sylvia didn't match up to her expectations, she could always train her a little. Now that you guys had your fun, it's my turn. Shiro smiled. You call that fun? Madison couldn't help but retort. Of course. Shiro grinned. Tapping her necklace, Shiro summoned Ascendant Dream, much to Sylvia's surprise. What kind of weapon is that? She asked curiously. Something I won in an auction. Shiro replied simply. She wasn't going to expose the fact that it was an orange-grade weapon just yet. After all, even though she wanted to recruit Sylvia, she hadn't spent enough time with her to warrant exposing this kind of information. Walking away from the party, Shiro narrowed her eyes. Littleine, You can also take this chance for some EXP. I want to see what happens when you reach level 50. Asterisk chirp. Soon, the party could hear distant screams that would be cut off abruptly. Sylvia couldn't help but glance at Lyrica and Madison in shock. Is she dash? Yeah, don't mind it. Shiro's abnormal. Madison waved it off since it was a normal sight for them to see Shiro play around with monsters higher than her level. Sometimes they wondered if Shiro was even human. Of course she wasn't. She's a snow woman, and on top of that, she was also a feared Snowmancer in her past life. Not that they knew the truth anyways. After resting for a short moment, the trio started to walk towards the obelisk. On their way there, they couldn't see any monsters, which could only mean that Shiro took care of them all. I still can't believe she's so powerful, Sylvia muttered with slight disbelief. Even though she knew Shiro could solo a raid boss when she was lower level, she didn't think it would be the same now. You girls took a while. I was considering the idea of killing the boss alone. Shiro grinned, seeing the trio walk towards her. As much as I want to think it was a joke, I know you can probably do it if you tried. Lyrica replied with a weary smile. You know me so well. Come on, we got a boss to kill. Shiro grinned before teleporting them to the boss room. So the boss is a giant dinosaur with wings, huh? Shiro said whilst craning her neck up to see the boss. While she was marveling at the boss, the trio behind her was in shock since they were making eye contact with the monster. It was as if it was contemplating about how it should eat them. Welp, let's clip its wings first. Shiro grinned. Asterisk click. Snapping her finger, a giant two-fold magic circle expanded out from under the boss. Asterisk bang bang. Two giant hands made from ice shot upwards and grabbed the monster's wings. Cracking sounds could be heard as the wings were being crushed. Don't just watch, okay? Do feel free to attack. Shiro chuckled whilst looking over her shoulder. All right, let's go. Lyrica nodded. While the duo dashed forward to attack the boss, Shiro stood near the back using her swords and glacial magic to support them. Sylvia was speechless seeing the support Shiro was giving the duo. Even without them saying anything, she was able to protect them at the perfect moment along with parrying the monster with her ice so that an attack would miss. Wow, she thought in awe. The key thing about being a support is observation, Shiro said, taking this moment to educate Sylvia a little. While a normal party would have people calling out for support, by the time they call out, it would be too dangerous. Therefore, it's the healer's job to look at every party member and attend to them when needed. Plus, there should also be a sense of trust between the party and the support. The reason as to why the two of them don't call out for support is because they trust their backs to me. Unless they need something such as a blessing from you, they would focus on the boss. Shiro smiled. Sylvia nodded her head since she understood this fact. But for them to trust her so intently, it was something rarely seen. It must be because she has the power to back it up. She gives them a sense of safety. Sylvia thought to herself since that was what all healers should aim for, giving their party a sense of safety. Whilst providing support for the duo, Shiro smiled when she found an opening. Blessing, Shiro called out as a golden glow encased her body. Raising up her right hand into the air, Shiro twisted her wrist and created a two-fold magic circle. Her swords flew upwards and gathered in the center with a dark purple aura around the blades. Calamity's will. Corruption spread out from the blades, which caused Sylvia to pale. Since she was a healer, she was more sensitive towards elements that erased life. However, even though she had come into contact with elements which caused her unease, she never felt anything as repulsive as what was being emitted from the swords right now. The magic circle started to construct a glacial trident in which the swords started to embed themselves into. The light blue color of the ice suddenly turned dark purple. Ha! Swiping down her hand, Shiro gritted her teeth, feeling the resistance from needing to control the trident. However, before the trident could hit the boss, a blinding light covered their eyes. Asterisk bang. When they opened their eyes again, they saw Shiro's glacial trident embedded into the dungeon door. Mutters could be heard around them as they looked around. Che, so the dungeon mutated, huh? Who's the unlucky one? Shiro clicked her tongue and retrieved her swords. Self-made skill recognized. awarding 200 free stat points. Lucky, Shiro thought with a smile. As for Sylvia, after hearing Shiro say the words dungeon mutated, her body shook slightly from the memory of their experience from the dungeon mutation. Is this what happens when the dungeon mutates and we're not the ones affected? Lyrica asked. Yeah. When a dungeon mutates, anyone outside of the affected party is expelled out of the dungeon until either the party dies, conquers the dungeon, or higher-level adventurers force the door open and rescue the affected party. Shiro shrugged. Huh, interesting. So what shall we do now? Lyrica asked. Well, we can either wait till the dungeon opens again, or we can leave. Let's wait, Madison suggested, since she wanted to tank against the boss a few more times to improve her technique. All right. Shiro nodded. In the meantime, she was going to check out her new skill. Since she didn't suggest a name, the system randomly generated one for her. Frozen Hell, Calamity Trident. A corrupted spear that will eat away at anything it touches. Cost, 50,000 MP. Duration, not applicable. Cooldown, 5 minutes. Calamity Trident. This is no doubt one of my strongest skills now. Frozen Slumber is an AoE while Calamity Trident is a single target. With these two, I have both crowd control and boss killers. Shiro thought with a smile. Since she had gained an additional 200 stat points, she allocated them all into her INT. Name, Shiro. Race, Snow Girl, evolution criteria yet to be met. Title, Shadow Empress, Proficient Monster, 231/500 humans killed. Fratricide, One Woman Battalion, creator of the Frozen Hell series, incomplete, Ice Princess. Level, 46. Class, Snow Girl, Snowmancer. HP, 220, 250/275, 000. MP, 272, 200/584, 320. STR, 1,400, plus 100. VIT, 1,800, plus 200. INT, 3,500-3,700, plus 550. AGI, 2,200, plus 450. Dex, 2,000, plus 100. Def, 600, plus 100. Equals title bonus. Unassigned points, 200-0. Attunements. Ice-Glacial Tier 2. Lightning Tier 2. Metal Tier 2. Shadow Ed Tier 2, augmented with Calamity's Will. Balance, 500,400,000 US. Equipment, tap to display. Skills. Snow Girl. Tier 2 Glacial Magic, passive regeneration, blessed by ice, faded snow movement, glacial aura, glacial touch, glacial breath. Ice field affinity, cold illusion. Nanomancer. Nanotech engineering Tier 2, bow creation, shield creation, melee weapon creation, armor creation, hand cannon creation, shotgun creation. Frozen Hell series. Frozen Slumber, Azure Hellfire, Calamity Trident. Ancient Healing Arts. Fire of Life. Other. Minimap, Inspection, Disguise, Mana Barrier, Lightning Magic, Tier 2. Metal Magic, Tier 2. Shadow Magic, Tier 2. Combust. Shared Skills, Een. Shadow Buff, Tier 1. Ice Chain, Tier 1. Shadow Cloak, Tier 1. Shadow Talon, Tier 1. Rift Walker, Tier 1. Absorption/Redirection, Tier 1. Shadow Affinity, Tier 2. With her MP passing the 500k mark, she had unlocked the next skill of her Nanomancer class. Shotgun Creation. No doubt the weapon with the shortest range out of her arsenal, but one of the most powerful. Glancing at the requirements to use her shotgun creation, Shiro clicked her tongue since a single shotgun required 100k MP to create. Not only that, each shot took a minimum of 25k MP. TSK. It seemed so cheap before as well. Shiro muttered in annoyance. When she was in her peak, 100k MP was nothing to her. However, 100k right now was almost 20% of her total MP. Amen? What's cheap? Lyrica asked curiously. Nothing. Don't worry about it. Shiro smiled and waved it off. I'll give the skill a try when I'm alone. she thought to herself before browsing on her phone for any recent news. Unfortunately, since the slum's operation was so big, it dominated the news. With titles such as Slum Factions Eradicated or Kairosa finally released from the cancer known as the Slum Factions, it was hard to find anything else worthwhile. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. Move out of the way. Someone shouted out, drawing attention to themselves. Shiro glanced up from her phone lazily and saw that they were level 60 plus. Ohaya? Who's so privileged to have high-level adventurers bust them out of the dungeon? Shiro asked casually. Apparently it's a kid from the Argent family. He was being level boosted by the Argent bodyguard. Someone replied. Thank you. Shiro smiled, having gotten an answer. My pleasure. He blushed seeing her smile. If I remember correctly, the Argent family is ranked 5, isn't it? Madison asked, sitting up. Argent family. Rank 5. Known for their family sword arts that are passed down to the main family members. Their sword arts, Crescent Moonblade, allows them to fight with enemies higher level than them on even footing. Shiro recited from memory. The group of 5 walked up to the dungeon door and nodded to each other. Asterisk boom. A reddish-gold aura exploded from their body as they pressed their palms against the dungeon door. Upon contact, the door let off a neon blue glow which shifted into the image of a 3-fold magic circle. Asterisk ping. The outermost ring broke apart as the party of 5 gritted their teeth. Only 2 more rings. Let's go. The leader shouted out. The main family had offered them a fortune for saving the youngest son. If they failed, they would suffer quite a penalty. Not only from the Argent family, but also the backlash from the dungeon. Asterisk ping. Breaking the second ring, 3 of the members were flung backwards with blood flowing out of their orifices. Seems like their body couldn't handle the backlash, Shiro said whilst crouching down near one of the party members. Asterisk ping. With the last ring broken, the remaining 2 members collapsed on their knees and coughed up a mouthful of blood. B-team, go in and rescue the target, the leader said weakly into the mic. He needed to have a moment's rest after suffering from the dungeon's backlash. Understood. Forcing the door open, a new group of 5 teleported into the dungeon. Well, if we're lucky, it'll take less than an hour before we can continue, Shiro said whilst walking back to the trio. I guess we should get warmed up then, Madison said whilst looking around her. The other adventurers warming up in preparation to re-enter the dungeon. However, not long after they started to warm up, they heard a bunch of people shouting. What's the commotion? Lyrica asked, stopping her stretch. TSK, TSK, TSK. Whoever is in there is unlucky. Shiro frowned. Why? What happened? I don't know, but the doors changed to a raid door. Shiro narrowed her eyes at the dungeon door. She could see the images morph around and eventually settled to one that most would see engraved onto a raid door. I believe this is called emergency raids. Sylvia frowned. Emergency raids? Shiro raised an eyebrow. Once again, this was a new concept that was never in her world. There had always been mutated dungeons, but never emergency raids. A rare occurrence where certain parameters are fulfilled to shift a dungeon into an emergency raid of the same genre. This dungeon is a dinosaur-based dungeon, meaning the emergency raid will be the same. A dinosaur-type raid. However, since no one has entered before, they don't know how to beat this raid. Right. Shiro frowned. Indeed. The worst part of this is that once the raid remains unconquered for a week, the monsters inside will break out. But once that happens, the monsters are always empowered and enraged. Seen as though this emergency raid is roughly level 60 to 65, only a few people inside the city will be able to kill them. Sylvia shook her head. Well, since that's the case, let's head back. We'll do another dungeon tomorrow, Shiro said nonchalantly and turned around. Sylvia was surprised at her actions. Makes sense. This isn't our problem to begin with. Lyrica shrugged. So what dungeon will we be doing tomorrow? Madison asked. I'm thinking of another level 55 dungeon. Once we get the 2 of you to level 45, we can do the team trial I got. Sword Myth Springs. Shiro replied whilst glancing over her shoulders. Seeing their carefree attitude of the serious situation, Sylvia couldn't help tilt her head. Heis, I can already tell what you want ask and the answer is we don't care. The dungeon/raid is now 20 levels higher than us, meaning we can barely do anything against the monsters. B. Even if we can, why should we? It's not like we owe them our lives or something. Plus, we don't know what the raid contains. The chances of death are much higher. You can offer me all the benefits and riches in the world, but this miss here ain't gonna risk my life for someone I don't even know. Shiro rolled her eyes. Sylvia paused since it was logical. No one would risk their lives for people they didn't know. Not only that, the monsters were 20 levels higher than them. It was suicide to try to help. You know, I think most people would at least act concerned before walking away, right? Sylvia asked with a slight twitch on her mouth. Why would we act? It's not like we're performing a live-action film. Shiro rolled her eyes. Now come on. We're leaving before this place gets too crowded. With how each of the families are, they might compete to see who's going to get first clear for the raid. Shiro continued with a shrug of her shoulders. While she didn't know about emergency raids, she did know about the first clear rewards for raids. There is apparently a guaranteed high-level item that will put even top-tier purple grade items to shame. However, the dangers of a first clear are apparent. If I guess right, the families would send out bounties to hire adventurers. Shame I'm not high enough level. Shiro thought with regret. Is everyone ready? Shiro asked with a small smile. Currently, Lyrica, Madison, and Sylvia were around her, preparing themselves to enter the Sword Myth Springs. Yeah. They nodded in sync. While Sylvia was only level 40, both Lyrica and Madison managed to hit level 45 after some early morning dungeon grinding. Then let's go. Pulling out a key, Shiro turned the key and a large portal appeared in front of them. They entered the portal one by one, while Kane was seeing them off. If you want, I can leave Ian with you to protect you. Shiro asked. Only she hadn't entered the portal yet. Yes, please. Kane agreed. She enjoyed playing around with the lazy bird after all. Take care of her, okay? As for her food, here's 3 days' worth of supplies. Don't let her eat all of it. Shiro smiled before entering the portal. #####. Opening her eyes slowly, Shiro saw that they were in a town of sorts. Looking at the architecture, they couldn't help but notice the resemblance to old Eastern-type villages. Wooden houses were positioned side by side with wooden signs telling what kind of shop it was. If they looked a little further away, they would see some large houses with tall concrete walls. Seems like the Sword Myth Springs is set in ancient Asia, Sylvia said whilst looking around. Shiro nodded her head and glanced at their mission. Sword Myth Springs, Team Trial. Legend has it that in the town of Nanchi, there lays a spring that will grant those who pass all its trials a suitable reward regarding the path of the sword. Your missions begin as you just arrive in the town as travelers. Raising an eyebrow at the mission, Shiro checked her inventory to see if they had provided them with things to help them. Amen? A golden pouch? Bringing out the pouch, she opened it to find 10 gold and silver blocks that looked like weird boats. She decided to inspect them since she didn't know what they were. Saisi/Yuan Bao. A type of currency. Simple enough. She thought with a shrug. All right, girls, let's have a quick team meeting first. Shiro called them trio over. First, we need to blend in so these clothes are a no-go right now. Next, we need information. We ask the surrounding residents about the legends, but try not to draw too much attention. Shiro whispered. Where should we ask for the information, though? We can't just ask some random people off the streets. Lyrica frowned. That I can take care of in the tavern. But as I said, let's go get some clothes. Shiro grinned and pointed at the shop that displayed clothes. The girls, especially Lyrica, were excited at the opportunity to try some new clothes. Lyrica was more excited about seeing Shiro in the clothes rather than herself, but that was obvious to both Sylvia and Madison. Unfortunately for Lyrica, Shiro did not know of her intent. Epsilon. Entering the store, the attendant was about to greet them but paused in shock seeing 4 beauties enter her shop. Excuse me, we'd like to buy some clothes. Shiro smiled cheerfully. The group was surprised to see Shiro's aura change into a playful young girl. Of course. Just follow me. The attendant smiled. They were a little surprised that the Asian-looking attendant spoke fluent English, but dismissed it as the trial making things easier for them. Following the attendant, they saw a bunch of clothes that had pretty much the same design but different colors. I know what these clothes are. They're called hanfu. They are in essence the clothes that people wore back in ancient China. Sylvia whispered to the group. Then let's go pick some. Shiro smiled and walked over to the section that contained the most amount of white hanfu. Browsing through the selection, Shiro eventually settled with one that transitions from an ice white to sky blue, and finally, to a light magenta. There were embroidered patterns along the sleeves and the skirt which gave the outfit more flair. In addition to this, it also came with a magenta ribbon that paired well with the overall outfit. Is there a changing room? Shiro asked. Yes, just go up the stairs and turn left. It is there where you shall find a room to change into the clothes. The attendant replied with a small bow. Nodding her head as thanks, Shiro followed her instructions and changed into the new outfit. She tried to conjure up an ice mirror, but frowned when she realized her magic had mostly been sealed away. Narrowing her eyes, she had a small suspicion on what's allowed and what's not allowed in this world. Maybe because it's sword myth springs, we can only use swords and sword skills? She thought whilst rubbing her chin. Tapping her necklace, she was able to summon her ascendant dream without a problem. Well, I guess we can handle it with just our sword skills. While she wasn't a swordswoman, she could use her orange grade swords to help her out. Lyrica was a sword-focused class, so she's fine, and Madison had her attack knight for the greatsword. That only left Sylvia with her being a healer. She didn't have any sword or skill to help her out in this trial. Perhaps we'll be able to buy her a sword or something similar. Shiro muttered as she prepared to walk back downstairs to pay for her outfit. Walking out of the changing room, she saw the three of them ready to change into their new outfits. The changing room's all yours. Shiro smiled. Sylvia and Madison nodded, whilst Lyrica burned the image of Shiro in a hanfu into her brain. Is there anything off? Shiro asked, seeing Lyrica's intense gaze. No, it's perfect. Lyrica replied. Perfect? In that case then phew. Go get changed while I pay for this. Shiro said whilst walking towards the attendant. So how much is this? She asked. Including the clothes that your friends chose, it'll be 5 silvers. The attendant smiled. Oh, 5 silvers, huh? Are you sure that's the right price? Shiro smiled with slight amounts of killing intent. The attendant paled slightly as she knew she poked the wrong nest. Asterisk cough, asterisk look at me. I must have grown old and remembered wrong. All of this is only 3 silvers. The attendant corrected herself. She had initially wanted to swindle a few more silvers from Shiro and the group since they looked new to this town. However, she didn't think the little girl in front of her would be so terrifying. Emin, is that so? Then how about you give us 4 of those veils over there? Shiro said, pointing towards the stand that displayed a variety of veils. Sure. Pick whichever one you want. The attendant fawned over Shiro, hoping to not earn her ire anymore, especially after feeling her killing intent. Gently throwing the attendant 3 silvers, Shiro walked over to the stand and picked up 4 veils. While it wouldn't hide their countenances completely, it was better than nothing. Waiting for a short moment, Shiro saw the trio walk out of the changing rooms. Lyrica chose a light green hanfu with white and yellow highlights. Madison chose black and red, whilst Sylvia chose a simple white one. Take a veil and put it on. Shiro called out and passed them 3 veils to split amongst themselves. She chose a white veil since it matched hanfu. After putting on their veils, the group left the building. So where are we going now? Lyrica asked whilst fiddling with her veil a little. Since it was her first time wearing one, she wasn't used to it. I'll be going to the tavern to try get us some intel. You girls can come with me if you want, Shiro replied, looking over her shoulder in the process. Now we're good. I'm thinking we should just go around the town and learn more about it for the first day. Like the way things work around here, Madison suggested. Good idea. While you girls do that, I'll go to the tavern over there for some info, and I'll also get us a few rooms for tonight, Shiro said whilst pointing towards a building in the distance. Got it. See you later. Madison nodded as she walked away with Lyrica and Sylvia. They decided that it was best to move as a three since Shiro can handle herself. Watching them leave, Shiro made her way to the tavern. In settings like this, there will always be people who will talk once you share some alcohol with them. Plus, they're going to drink with this miss. She mused to herself. Entering the tavern, she saw that it wasn't the same kind of tavern she knew. Instead of a main counter where you can sit down and drink, there were tables and waiters instead. In that case, things might be a little more annoying. Sitting down on an empty table, Shiro gestured for the waiter to come over to her. "Hello, miss. How can I help today?" he asked politely whilst trying to suppress the blush that crept up onto his face. "How much is your strongest alcohol?" she asked with a soft tone. "Ah, that'll be a few coppers for the most basic baijiu, white spirit," he replied with confusion. "Why would a beautiful girl want baijiu?" Then can you give me enough baijiu for a single silver?" Shiro asked. "Gladly, coming right up," the waiter replied. Since she was going to pay, why would he worry about why she wanted their best wine? Looking at the vase that had a Chinese character written on the side, Shiro unplugged it and smelt the aroma. Not bad, I guess? While she couldn't taste it, she could most certainly smell the strong alcoholic scent from the container. Shrugging her shoulders, Shiro brought the container to her lip and drank a few large mouthfuls. The scene shocked the surroundings guests since baijiu would normally be drank in small wine cups, not to mention the fact that one would normally have a large break between shots. However, looking at Shiro who was downing the alcohol, they couldn't help but cringe just from the thought of how it would taste. "Little waiter, why don't you tell me some interesting stories about Nanchi?" Shiro asked, placing the container back on the table. The waiter couldn't respond since he just saw a young girl down around half a container worth of baijiu in one go. Shiro frowned a little before waving her and in front of his face. Sorry, can you repeat that please?" He apologized. "I said, why don't you tell me some interesting stories about Nanchi?" "Well, other than the Sword Myth Springs, Nanchi doesn't really have anything else." He shrugged since everything about Nanchi was average. If it wasn't for the legend of the Sword Myth Springs, hardly anyone would know about this place. "In that case, then tell me about the Sword Myth Springs," Shiro said, gesturing for him to sit down opposite her. "Where shall I start?" ####. In the end, Shiro had listened to the waiter talk about the Sword Myth Springs for an entire hour. However, the worst part of this was that she could simplify everything she heard in the hour. A powerful warrior, unmatched in the world, told everyone where he got his power before being killed by the onslaught of over 100,000 men. After him, there had been several other powerful swordsmen who said the same thing, which solidified the legend. Therefore, Nanchi would get visitors all year round looking for the Sword Myth Springs. While only a few have managed to find the springs, they've never divulged the actual location, resulting in other people having to look for it themselves. Some would spend years here with no success. "That makes our mission harder, doesn't it?" Madison sighed. "Not necessarily." Shiro grinned. "I've managed to gather a bunch of main locations that people visit to look for the Sword Myth Springs. Since other people managed to find the springs without knowing about where it is, there's no reason for us to fail here either," she said, unfolding a map she bought. On the map, there are several crosses that represent the prime locations. "Is there more that we should know?" Sylvia asked. "In fact, there is. Some of these locations might feature a boss that we have to beat. Apparently it's randomized, so I'm not too sure about their spawns. However, we'll find out tomorrow once we go to the locations." Shiro smiled before dismissing them back to their rooms. Storing everything away, Shiro decided to sit by the window for a bit and watch the night sky. Lyrica seemed to want to talk to me about something else today. I wonder what she wants, she thought whilst waiting for Lyrica to knock on her door. ****. As expected, she heard a knock after a rather short wait. "You wanted to talk to me?" Shiro asked with a smile whilst opening the door. "You found out?" "It was pretty obvious from my point of view." Shiro shrugged with a chuckle. "What I wanted to talk to you about is a strange feeling I've had since entering this place. It's like when your attention is dragged towards an item even though you don't know what it is. I keep having a feeling that I should head towards the north, Hmm, that is rather strange. So you say you keep on having the feeling of wanting to go north? Yeah. We'll make our way to the north tomorrow and see what's going on then. Is there anything else you want me to know? Shiro asked. There is actually another thing. I think I might be having a breakthrough in my hidden proficiency. Pardon? Shiro asked with uncertainty in her voice. I think I might be having a breakthrough in my hidden proficiency, Lyrica repeated. Shiro narrowed her eyes in slight confusion. Even though we know what her weapon of choice is, it is still nigh impossible for her to feel a breakthrough so soon. Shiro thought to herself. The hardest part about advancing hidden proficiency is that most of the combat potential is instinctive. The users don't actively know what they're doing, so it is harder for them to improve on themselves. That was the nature of hidden proficiency. Even though they were a gift from the heavens, the trials that one must go through to improve is equally as tough. There was no free food in the world after all. What makes you think that? Shiro asked as she wanted to make sure that Lyrica was indeed having a breakthrough. Well, when I fight with my dual-ended swords, I feel like I can tap into moments where everything slows down. But no matter how hard I try, I can't go any further. It's like a small veil is stopping me from advancing. I'm so close yet so far. Lyrica sighed. That is indeed the feeling you get when you're on the verge of a breakthrough. Shiro leaned back a little. When an adventurer gets this feeling, it is when they're about to fully form their attack domain. The fact that things are slowing down in her eyes means she's slowly grasping all the movements in a certain area around them. For Lyrica to have this feeling so soon, she must be working hard to gain experience in fighting. She thought with a small smile. I believe that what you're experiencing now is a small bottleneck just before unlocking your attack domain. Attack domain? Lyrica tilted her head slightly in confusion. An attack domain is where one is able to grasp everything in the area around them. This is the step before grasping a full domain, but I'll tell you that later. Personally, I've never managed to form the attack domain, so I can't really teach you about it. Shiro smiled apologetically. She wanted to help, but she couldn't do anything right now. When she reached her apex, she had her Snowmancer class to create an entire fortress to help win her battles. There was no need for her to get close to the enemy at all. Therefore, she never even managed to develop an attack domain. And I had managed to achieve full body control as well. What a waste. Shiro lamented. With a talent like full body control, theoretically, it would have been a cakewalk to achieve an attack domain. But in the end, her advantages with range never gave her the chance to form the attack domain. Maybe we'll find out when we fight some monsters tomorrow. Lyrica sighed whilst laying her back on the bed. Hee, why don't you let me sleep here instead? Lyrica grinned and shifted her body onto her side before patting the spot next to her. Shiro smiled wearily before walking over. Lyrica's excitement was cut short when Shiro flicked her on the forehead. Stop messing around and go to sleep already. Shiro chuckled slightly. Fine. Walking out of the room, Lyrica closed the door and sighed sadly. But I wasn't messing around, she whispered quietly before walking away. In the next morning, they gathered just outside the town and prepared to go to the first marker. Before we go, let's see what we can do first. I'm able to summon my 4 swords, but they're in their base state. I can't use any of the elemental shifts, Shiro said whilst summoning her Ascendant Dream. While she could use her Snowmancer skills to create bladed weapons, that was the limit of her power. She couldn't make any of her guns or armor. I can still use all of my sword skills, but that's it. I can't use anything else other than them. Lyrica responded. I can only use Attack Demon Knight. Madison shrugged. What about you, Sylvia? Shiro asked since she was her biggest concern. Sylvia was a healer. All of her experience and skills focused on healing, so there was no way she could use the sword. Surprisingly, I can still use the most basic healing spell, Sylvia admitted while a golden glow appeared in her hand. Handy. Shiro nodded her head. But take a sword just in case, she said, and floated one of her swords over to Sylvia. Grabbing the sword, Sylvia was a little surprised by how heavy they were. Wow, these things are heavy, she admitted whilst trying to hold the sword steady but eventually failed. Really? They feel kinda light? Shiro tilted her head whilst juggling two swords in the air. Looking at Shiro, who was juggling the swords like they were bean bags, she couldn't help but feel a twitch on the corner of her lips. "Little miss, I'm not abnormal like you," she thought in her mind. "Shiro's right, these are kinda light," Lyrica said as Madison nodded. They both felt the weight of the swords and swung them around with ease. "But your warrior base classes. Shiro's a mage." She only thought this since the moment she dropped the sword on the ground. She could clearly see it sink downwards. While it was true that swords were heavier the higher level you are because of a person's strength increase, however, even then, it wasn't something a mage should be able to handle. Which only meant Shiro's STR should be ridiculously high, Sylvia thought in disbelief. What she doesn't know is that while Shiro's STR is indeed higher than average, it was still quite a bit lower than Warrior's. But the main reason was because her monster title basically doubles the values of each point. One can say that right now, Shiro was a warrior class adventurer that had twice the attack power of mages her level. Then how about you take 2 daggers then?" Shiro asked. Taking out 2 spare daggers that she had kept in her inventory just in case, she handed them over to Sylvia. She did try to take things other than weapons out her inventory, but something was blocking them from being used. Other than a few exceptions and bladed weapons, her inventory was basically for show. "These are a bit better," Sylvia admitted, whilst testing the daggers. "Good. Then we'll see if we can find some low-level monsters for you to get a feel for them first. We don't want to drop you straight into a high-level fight after all." Shiro smiled. However, both Lyrica and Madison paled at that smile since it was the same smile she had when she threw them towards a boss higher level than them. "You have my condolences," they both prayed. ###. "Help me," Sylvia shouted out whilst running away from a level 40 horned rabbit that was chasing after her. "Just stab it, it's that simple." Shiro grinned whilst she was sitting on a tree branch with Lyrica and Madison. Both Lyrica and Madison watched since they have somewhat gotten used to this now. It was somewhat of a small tradition in their party. "Shouldn't we get her something higher level than her? Why just a rabbit?" Madison asked since she felt that Shiro was being biased. Both she and Lyrica had to face the wrath of a boss, while Sylvia only needed to fight a rabbit. "She's just a healer. I can't just throw her towards a boss." Shiro shrugged. "That being said, since we're in a trial, deaths don't count." She then narrowed her eyes towards Sylvia. "I heard that," Sylvia shouted out whilst throwing her dagger backwards. Dang. The horned rabbit only swung its head to the side and knocked the dagger away. "You forced me to do this." She gritted her teeth and swung the dagger towards the rabbit. However, the end result was the rabbit overpowering her and knocking her second dagger away. "F***CKKKKK. Sylvia shouted out and continued to run away. "She's cursing now," Lyrica reported. "Second stage already? That was rather quick." Madison nodded. During this tradition, one would go through the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally, acceptance. "Please, horned rabbit, I've always treated your race kindly," Sylvia shouted out behind her. "Ah, the bargaining stage," Lyrica said whilst pointing at Sylvia, who was on the verge of tears. "She's really charging through the stages, isn't she?" Shiro nodded. "Why me?" Sylvia cried out as tears started to flow. "TTTT. Depression, huh?" Madison raised an eyebrow. "I'm guessing she'll take a few seconds to enter the acceptance." Shiro yawned slightly. And as she had guessed, Sylvia's face slowly transitioned into the face of a woman who had found inner peace. "So this is the party. If I want to join, I need to be abnormal myself," she thought to herself in enlightenment. "Wow, she looks quite happy, huh?" "Indeed. Poochie. Rip. _ Holy sh**t. Did she just bite the rabbit?" Madison cried out in shock seeing Sylvia bite the rabbit on the side of the neck. She almost fell off the tree because of this. The horned rabbit convulsed in pain whilst Sylvia walked over to her dagger before picking it up. Crouching beside the rabbit, She stabbed it through the head and ended its suffering. Seems like she's accepted her situation and awakened a new side of her. Shiro smiled happily. Jumping off the tree, they walked towards her. So how was it? Shiro asked. Did I just bite ** King Rabbit on the neck? Sylvia asked in disbelief. Yup, congratulations. Shiro replied with a grin. Congratulations, my ass. Sylvia retorted, having the sudden urge to flip a table in anger. However, Lyrica noticed how this small tort activity had opened Sylvia up more to the team. She seemed more relaxed around them now. Previously, she was still a little awkward since she couldn't just buddy up to Shiro. But now, the duo was joking around with Shiro grinning and Sylvia complaining about her suffering. That's just like her. Lyrica smiled softly, seeing Shiro integrate Sylvia into the party so quickly. Clap. All right, now that Sylvie's managed to awaken a new side to her, I think she's ready for the real test. Shiro smiled. Hold up, did you just call her Sylvie? Lyrica asked, feeling a little jealous. Is there a problem? Well, you call Madison Maddie and Sylvia Sylvie. What about my nickname? Lyrica's kinda hard to shorten though. Leary? Rika? Riri? It just doesn't have the same Lyrica feel. Shiro explained. That is indeed true. Lyrica nodded her head after a short moment. I like Riri, but you're right. It doesn't give the same feeling as calling Lyrica well. Lyrica. Madison shrugged her shoulders. So out of our party, only me, and you don't have a nickname yet. Shiro smiled and patted Lyrica on the shoulders. It's fine. Lyrica nodded her head eagerly, since that meant it was one more thing she had in common with Shiro. Sure, I guess. Well, enough about that. Let's go to the first marker. Shiro shrugged at Lyrica's behavior. ####. Once they arrived at the location, they were surprised about the scenery. The marker pointed them towards a huge waterfall that was connected to the lake. In the middle of the lake was a small island that had a tall stone tablet situated in the center of the tablet. Seems like we're a bit late, Shiro said, seeing a few groups waiting by the side. Oh, someone is going to the island, Madison called out, drawing their attention to the island. The group that was rowing a boat to the island consisted of 5 people who were basically wearing the same uniform. While Lyrica, Madison, and Sylvia was watching the group, Shiro focused her hearing on the surrounding conversations to learn more about them. It seems like this group of people are known for their proficiency with the sword. Apparently, they're from the Severing Moon sect, a sect famous for their swordsmanship, she thought, simplifying all of the things she had heard. Wait, why are they burying their swords into the ground? Lyrica frowned. The group had stabbed their sword into the ground to the point that only the guard and handle could be seen. After waiting for a while, the 5 of them looked at each other before nodding and pulled their swords out. Each of the blades were covered with a white glow. Rumble. Quickly stabilizing herself, Shiro made sure the others were fine before looking back at the group of 5. Water dragons? Wait, no, they're not dragons. Shiro narrowed her eyes, seeing 5 large dragon-like serpents erupt from the lake around them. However, what happened next caused the surrounding spectators to pale. The serpent's hiss caused the sword users to stumble around as if they were in a drunken state. While this was happening, bones would also shoot out of the serpent's body and attack them relentlessly. Holy damn, Shiro muttered with a frown. Can we really do this? Sylvia asked with uncertainty. This is a trial. They won't give us something we can't do. Lyrica said, but she too had her own concerns about this test. Let's give it a try. It's fine even if we die since it's a trial. Madison followed up after a short pause. While they were talking, the group from the Severing Moon sect was ripped apart and eaten by the serpents. After having their meal, the serpents retreated back into the water. While the scene caused several teams to leave in fear, there was still quite a lot of people staying behind to challenge test. Waiting patiently by the trees, the group watched as each team challenged the boss. While there was a 95% mortality rate, there were times when they would see groups that pass. The key to passing the test was to survive long enough. Once the time is up, the boss would retreat back into the water. Following this, a silver glow would encase the challengers. Once it was finally their turn, The girls didn't say anything but sit on the boat and traveled towards the island. Wow, anyone know of these ladies? Could they be from a famous sect? Shouldn't we stop them? It would be a waste for beauties like them to die. Hearing the chatter around them, Shiro frowned before releasing a sliver of killing intent. She couldn't have them distracting her party members before an important fight after all. After being exposed to the killing intent, the surrounding spectators felt like Shiro was much more dangerous than the actual bosses and shut up immediately. As for the more powerful cultivators, they snapped their eyes open and looked at Shiro in surprise as well as jubilation. If a young girl like her has such a powerful killing intent, that means she's experienced. If I can recruit her into my team, I should be able to conquer the bosses easily. They would think along these lines. Each of them started to formulate a plan to recruit her, and while they were doing this, they kept their eye on Shiro so that they could evaluate her potential. Let's see if her potential and experience matches up, they thought to themselves. Upon arriving on the island, Shiro found that the space available was surprisingly large. Each of them had enough room to spin in a circle with a sword and not hit each other. Trial of the Water Serpent. Bury your sword into the ground to reinforce your sword. Once that is done, survive the onslaught of the water serpents for 10 minutes. Failure means death. Shiro muttered out whilst reading the sight. Tapping her necklace, Shiro summoned her ascendant dream and buried it into the ground. Lyrica, Madison, and Sylvia did the same, even though Sylvia only had 2 daggers. A commotion instantly erupted seeing Shiro summon 4 floating swords. She has a divine relic. Someone shouted out. But I've never heard of a divine relic in the form of 4 floating swords. Maybe they're individual relics? Which could mean she is controlling 4 divine relics. Greed started to surface in their eyes. Frowning at the different stares, Shiro eventually ignored it since she had bigger concerns. Conditions met. Challenge starts in 10 seconds. Please prepare yourselves. Looking at the system notification, they looked at each other and nodded. As planned as before, Sylvia will be in the middle of all of us since she's not too proficient with daggers. Shiro said seriously and pulled out her swords. Holding a blade in each hand, she let the other 2 float around them as an extra layer of protection. Asterisk rumble. Seeing the 5 serpents appear, Shiro couldn't help but whistle at how big they looked up close. Asterisk HSSSSS. Shiro muttered in shock seeing her vision started to blur. Stumbling around in a drunken state, Shiro found it hard to focus her mind on anything. This is bad, she thought with a frown. Meanwhile, both Madison and Sylvia was experiencing the same thing. Lyrica, on the other hand, was able to somewhat focus her mind. Asterisk dang dang. Parrying 2 of the bones, Lyrica then grabbed one of Shiro's floating swords before slashing upwards at another bone. Asterisk crack. Damn, that's sharp, Lyrica thought in shock. While she did know that Shiro's swords were orange-grade weapons, their quality far surpassed her expectations. While Lyrica was trying her best at defending the party, both Madison and Shiro were struggling. Even though Shiro's situation was slightly better since her instincts were top-notch, Madison wasn't as fortunate. Protecting her body with her great sword, she gritted her teeth in pain. Due to her drunken state, she wasn't able to parry the strikes, meaning she could only resort to resisting against it with brute force. Come on, she shouted out whilst kicking her great sword upwards in order to force the bones back. As for Sylvia, since she was being covered by the trio, she could only use her healing spells to try help the party out. This can't go on. Shiro frowned after seeing the current situation. Right now, I'm barely hanging by using my instinct dash. Asterisk dang. Quickly parrying 2 bones with her swords, Shiro flicked her wrist and sent them back. Motherf asterisk cur. This miss is trying to think here. Shiro cursed out towards the water serpent. However, the serpents gave her no respite since the attacks intensified. Shiro, who wasn't even given a break to think clearly, gritted her teeth in anger. Taking a deep breath, she erased the emotions on her face and tried to push her focus to its limit. Even with the serpents forcing her into a drunken state. She's changed. The more powerful spectators thought, seeing a change in Shiro's aura. Sylvia, Madison, stay close to me, Shiro ordered seriously. The duo nodded their heads, seeing how serious Shiro was right now. Flicking her wrist, Shiro sent one of her swords up into the air. With only one sword in her hand and 3 floating around her, she recreated her dual-layered defense that she had employed back in the trial to obtain her sword. However, due to the fact that she also needed to protect Sylvia and Madison, her defense had to be spread out. This caused several holes to appear which the serpents took advantage of. Asterisk dang dang. Twisting her body in the air, Shiro deflected the incoming bones. SK. This miss isn't the defensive type. Lyrica, are you able to help Sylvia and Madison for a bit? Shiro shouted out since her defense was the weakest. She was a pure attack type that followed the principle of kill them before they hit you. Yeah, I can. Just go do what you need to do. Lyrica nodded since her current state allowed her to deflect the incoming attacks without too much strain. Hearing her response, Shiro flicked her wrist and retracted her swords so that they floated around her. What is she doing? Isn't this just sending her teammates to their deaths? The spectators shouted out in shock. From their perspective, all Shiro needed to do was survive for a little longer and they'll pass. For her to suddenly retract her defenses was completely suicidal. Ignoring their questioning gazes, Shiro couldn't help but want to slap every one of them that was staring so intently. This miss is trying to focus in a drunken state. Can you not stare so blatantly? Crouching down on the ground, Shiro jumped up towards the first serpent. Asterisk HSSS. Shooting out more bones from its body, the serpent glared at Shiro, wanting nothing more than to kill the person in front of it. However, Shiro twisted her body gracefully in the air and dodged the bones. Flexing her fingers, she controlled the swords to help reposition her body on the bones and dashed towards the serpent's head. Grabbing 2 of her swords, she controlled the other 2 to rip open the serpent's jaw. Asterisk crack. HSSS. The crowd suddenly had the urge to flip a table when they saw Shiro dive into the serpent's mouth. Is she suicidal? Crazy be asterisk TCH. They cursed out in shock. Asterisk rip. Before they could even digest this feeling, they saw Shiro slash her way out of the serpent's back, snapping the spine in the process. This scene caused the other serpents to widen their eyes in shock. Chance, Shiro thought, seeing a perfect chance to kill another one. Stepping on one of her floating swords, she catapulted her body towards another serpent. HA, she shouted out while stabbing both its eyes. Asterisk HSSS. Switching her grip on the sword into a reverse grip, Shiro twisted her body clockwise and ripped out a chunk of the serpent's eye. Go! She commanded as all 4 swords dived into the eye and started to wreak havoc inside the serpent's body. Looking at their fellow serpent brother convulse in pain before dying, the remaining 3 serpents retreated hastily back into the lake. Oh my God! Mother! She's too scary. The serpents wanted to cry. The thought of revenge didn't even occur since she could easily kill their brother while in a drunken state. If she was fully focused, would she erase them in an instant? Little did they know, they were completely right. Landing back on the center island, Shiro sighed at the fact that her hanfu was stained with the serpent's blood. What a waste. She lamented since she quite liked the look of the hanfu. Emin? What's up? She asked, seeing Lyrica, Madison, and Sylvia look at her in disbelief. What's up my ass? Did you just kill 2 of the test conductors? Sylvia felt like she wanted to hit Shiro in the head. And Shiro tilted her head in confusion. Aren't we supposed to survive? It never stated to kill the conductors. Sylvia replied. But I mean, it just told us to survive. It never said how we should survive. If there are none to threaten us, doesn't that mean we survive anyway? Shiro shrugged. Sylvia didn't know what to say since Shiro's thought process was infallible. It was as she said, the tablet only told them to survive for 10 minutes. There was no mention of if they could attack the attackers or not. They just assumed they had to defense due to the keyword survive. A short moment later, a silver glow encased their bodies, signifying their success in the test. Underscore. It bloody worked. The crowd thought in disbelief. When they saw Shiro kill 2 out of the 5 serpents, they were sure that she would fail the test. But reality thought different. Well, let's go on to the next test site then. Shiro smiled and led them away from the area. Watching the group of girls leave, the spectators didn't know if the test would continue. The next group looked at each other before making their way to the center island. Burying their swords, they waited for the test to start. When they felt the familiar rumble, they sighed in relief. At least we can still continue with this test, they thought. The rumble continued for a bit longer before stopping. One of the serpents poked his head out warily and started to look around, making sure that Shiro wasn't in sight. It sighed in relief before looking at the next group. However, when it saw a woman, it widened its eyes and plunged back into the lake. Not too long after, a tail with some ink on the tip started to write something badly on the tablet. The hell? The woman shouted out in anger. Meanwhile, the next spot shouldn't be too far from us. It's in a cave behind some foliage, Shiro said, pointing at the map. Arriving at the location, they were surprised to see that no one was outside. Maybe the test is inside? Lyrica suggested. Might be. Leading the group into the cave, Shiro frowned, seeing the visibility drop massively. It was as if they walked through a realm and entered a plane of darkness. Everyone stay close to each other, Shiro called out. However, when she got no reply, she started to worry. Moving around, Shiro tried to look for the girls, but she couldn't feel anything. One of the strangest aspects in this area was that she couldn't feel the walls either. The longer she stayed here, the lower her eyesight became. Eventually, she couldn't see anything but darkness. No shades of black, no nothing. Seems like the trial has started already. Shiro frowned. Tapping her necklace, she summoned her swords once more. Holding one sword in her right hand, she allowed the other 3 to orbit around her. Suddenly, a dense amount of killing intent assaulted her senses. The density rivaled her own, much to her shock. A feeling of danger washed over her as she moved to the side on instinct. Arg! She suddenly felt a blade pierce her left shoulder. SSSS. Is this trial scaled to one's capabilities? Shiro thought to herself whilst increasing the defenses around her. Filtering out the killing intent with her own intent, Shiro tried to lock on to the assailant. However, she frowned when she realized her other senses being cut off. She could see, hear, or touch anything. Even the feeling of her hand gripping the handle of her sword faded away. During this, an idea popped into her head. Che, what an annoying way to cultivate one's sense of danger. Shiro muttered with a click of her tongue. She understood that by cutting off the senses, one would start to rely more on their instincts. Fine, I'll play along for now. Relaxing her entire body, her aura started to fade. It was as if she suddenly died on the spot. Allowing herself to sink into her instincts, Shiro waited patiently for the assailant to take the bait. She felt danger overwhelm her from above and flicked her fingers. 2 swords stabbed upwards, but failed to pierce anything. You think a feint can mislead this, miss? Shiro said coldly, appearing in front of her assailant. Her sword plunged into its neck, stopping it in its tracks. Gripping its face, Shiro sunk her fingers into all the openings she could feel. The eyes, nose, and ear. A small head. She thought before slamming the pommel of her other sword into its jaw. The result of her action was the complete separation of the upper skull to the jaw to the 2 opposing forces she applied on the assailant's skull. Its death returned all of her senses back to her. Looking around, she saw that she was back outside the cave with a dark purple glow that encased her body before fading away. Trial passed, huh? Now all that's left is to wait, Shiro muttered, looking back at the cave. She had to wait for the rest of her party to come out. Waiting just outside of the cave, Shiro started to frown. Player, Sylvia, has been eliminated. Player, Madison, has been eliminated. Furrowing her brows, Shiro started to shake her leg up and down restlessly. 2 of them have failed. Would Lyrica pass? She thought with uncertainty. However, another problem appeared. With both Sylvia and Madison now out of the trial, they lacked a tank and healer. Since this was a team trial, You were supposed to complete it as a team. Shiro would look back and forth from the cave and her system. Thankfully, however, she saw Lyrica slowly walk out of the cave. Her body was entirely inured with blood and wounds all over her. Lyrica! Shiro cried out in shock and dashed over to help her. Looking at Lyrica's injured, Shiro didn't even know how she was still standing. I passed. Lyrica smiled tiredly whilst relaxing in Shiro's embrace. Good job. Rest for a little bit. Shiro smiled and patted Lyrica's head. Scooping her up into a princess carry, Shiro took her over to a tree and sat her in the shade. Lyrica would have normally burned the feeling into her mind, but right now, she could barely feel the rest of her body. A single movement would send a pulse of pain through her body. Do you have any healing potions on you? Shiro asked gently. She knew that injured people normally wouldn't like to have loud noises around them. I do, but I can't take them out, Lyrica replied with a shake of her head. Frowning slightly, Shiro decided to try her luck in town. Wait for me here. I'll go buy some medicine for you. However, before Shiro could leave, a new concern popped into her head. With a beautiful girl like Lyrica injured and defenseless near a tree, isn't that asking for her to be a him attacked? Shiro thought to herself. Actually, let me move you to somewhere more suitable, Shiro said, changing her mind. Lyrica only nodded her head obediently. Scooping her up into a princess carry once more, Shiro made sure that Lyrica was comfortable by using Third Phantom. By transferring all of the momentum and recoil into her own body, she can avoid harming Lyrica. It's like a bed, Lyrica thought to herself. Apart from the wind blowing on her face along with subtle shaking to inform her that they were moving, Lyrica felt like she was currently resting her body on a small ice bed. Looking around the area, Shiro found an obscure cave that was situated at the side of a mountain. To get to the cave, one would need to parkour from one side of the mountain to the other. This should be fine. Not many people can get up here, Shiro thought to herself. This should be quite safe for you. Wait for me here, okay? Shiro smiled. Lyrica nodded her head. Walking back to the entrance, Shiro looked back at Lyrica before leaping out of the cave. Dashing through the forest, she soon found herself back at the entrance of the town. Now then, where is the pharmacy? Shiro muttered with a frown. Walking to the first stall she saw, she called over owner. Helldash, where can I buy medicine? Shiro asked, cutting her off. Where can I buy medicine? It's urgent, Shiro repeated. Considering the severity of Lyrica's wounds, there is the possibility that she was inflicted with a bleed status. If she doesn't get medicine quickly, it would rob Lyrica of this golden chance. Since she said she could sense something in the north, I can't let her fail this trial. Shiro thought to herself. Medicine. Right, go down the road and take the right alley next to the tavern. You should be able to spot old Mangu's medicine shop dash. Before the woman could even finish, Shiro was long gone. Following the instructions of the owner, she saw a wooden door with the site, Old Mangu's Pharmacy. Don Don. Shiro knocked on the door and waited patiently. Of course, that was a slight stretch, since if the person didn't respond in 30 seconds, she was going to kick the door down. Coming, a weak voice called out. Creak. A wrinkled hand opened the door. Looking at the small old man in front of her, Shiro wondered if adventurers could even age like that. It was due to the fact that while adventurers did age, they would retain quite a lot of their fighting power even at the last stages of their lifespan. For a person to look this feeble and weak, it was truly a first for Shiro. Oh, what a surprise. A young girl like you would visit this old man. He chuckled whilst checking out Shiro. A slender waist, smooth skin, thin limbs, and a beautiful face. While the white hair is a little weird, it's not bad, I suppose. He grinned inwardly. Pulling a face of absolute disgust, Shiro already knew he was nothing good. You got any medicine for treating a large amount of sword wounds? Oh, and also some disinfectant and some medical bandages, Shiro asked whilst suppressing the disgust in her heart. Ho, I do, but they're expensive. From the look of things, you're quite desperate for them, aren't you? From your description, your friend must have suffered quite the injury from the sword trials, right? He said with a grin. Heis. I swear the amount of guys I've seen that act the same way as you, Shiro said whilst glaring at him with disdain. Old man, let this princess teach you something, she continued as she grabbed him by the throat. This princess ain't something you can obtain. F***ck that, you're not even worth a strand of my hair, Shiro said coldly. Her eyes radiated merciless killing intent that would destroy everything in life that she hated. The old man paled slightly before his body started to convulse. Reeling back in disgust, Shiro threw his body against the wall. Splat. The force of her throw turned his body into a meat paste that sent blood and flesh all over the room. Walking into the room with disregard of the meat paste, Shiro started to shuffle through all the drawers for something she could use. Why doesn't he have anything? Shiro narrowed her eyes in confusion. Before she could continue her search, she instinctively jumped through the window and rolled a few times before stabilizing herself on her feet. She saw a black figure standing near her previous spot. Kakik, as expected, your instincts are sharp, the black figure said with joy in his voice. Looking at the shadow, Shiro realized it to be the blood of the old man that she had killed. Che, what's a blood demon like you doing at this place? Shiro questioned with narrowed eyes. Ohaya, you know of my race? Well, I can't help but admit that this is quite the surprise, Kakik. He grinned. Flicking his hand, he coagulated a sword made from solidified blood. He's not using lethal blood magic? Shiro thought with a mix of surprise and suspicion. Blood demons were known for their dangerous blood magic that is almost impossible to defend against. However, if the blood demon in front of her was using a blood-crafted sword instead of lethal blood magic, that could only mean it was restricted to the rules of this world as well. Then that means he's not a true blood demon in essence, but rather just a swordsman with the form of a blood demon. Tapping her necklace, Shiro summoned her ascendant dream and grabbed one of the swords while the other three orbited her. 4 swords, huh? Let me give it a try as well. He chuckled before creating 3 floating swords as well. However, before he could taunt Shiro, he widened his eyes when he saw her right in front of him. Dang. Locking swords with her, he retreated a few steps. Has anyone told you about taking the initiative and not waste time? No? Let me acquaint you, Shiro said whilst shifting her grip into a reverse grip and twisted her body. Bang. Giving the demon a devastating roundhouse kick to the head, Shiro threw her sword towards him. Cling. The demon was able to raise his hand just quick enough to deflect the sword. But due to the fact that all 4 swords were linked to her, controlling the sword in the air was an easy feat for Shiro. Flicking her fingers, Shiro controlled the sword to stab through the back of his hand. Gah! Grabbing his wrist, Shiro grinned before stomping the back of his elbow. Crack. The demon gritted his teeth and tried to slash at her, but Shiro dodged easily. Crouching down, Shiro made eye contact with the demon and grinned sadistically. She stabbed out with her elbow and jabbed the demon on the spine. This caused him to kneel forward. Shiro took this chance to grab both his wrists and step on the back of his head. How dare you? How can a weak human overpower me? A monster! He cried out in anger. Ha ha ha, did this princess not tell you? You're not the only monster here, boy, Shiro grinned before putting force into her legs and ripped his arms off. Snapping her fingers, she controlled the swords to stab into his shoulders and lift him up. He opened his mouth to speak, but a sword plunged into his throat and through his heart. However, his body broke down into a pool of blood before coagulating itself back together not too far from her spot. Looking at the demon panting heavily, Shiro made a blank face before tilting her head and smiled sadistically. Seems like you can regenerate. Feel free to entertain this princess, okay? Shiro said with a small chuckle. Glaring at her in anger, a creepy laugh started to seep out of his lips. Hee, let's see how long you can keep this up. My companion has your friend, and he'll be arriving soon. This caused Shiro to lose her smile as her face became that of a cold assassin. Speak of the demon and he'll appear. The demon grinned before pointing behind Shiro. Shiro, Lyrica muttered weakly, grabbing Shiro's attention. Turning around, Shiro saw Lyrica being held by another blood demon. Asterisk dang. One of her swords collided with the blood demon's sword and stopped it from stabbing her head. Even though she had turned around, it didn't mean her guard was dropped. If you want your friend to pass this trial, you better drop your swords right now. He grinned. You know, since this is a trial, death doesn't mean much. Shiro narrowed her eyes. Why get so hung over a trial? Plus, I think I'll spare my friend the humiliation of being held captive with her not being able to do anything. Shiro flicked her wrist before allowing her swords to run rampant around the area, slicing up everything it touched. Are you crazy? He shouted out in shock. Yes. Asterisk Poochie. Both of the demon, including Lyrica, was stabbed by the swords and ripped apart. However, Lyrica was still conscious with only her upper torso. Why? She asked with tears in her eyes. Stop that. My friend won't act this way, Shiro said blandly before stabbing her sword into Lyrica's head. Asterisk ping. The sound of glass shattering rang out as Shiro realized she was still outside the cave. Test of heart, huh? She muttered with a frown. Looking around her, she saw that Lyrica, Madison, and Sylvia were sitting in a lotus position with sweat on their faces. So they're in the same test. During that test, she didn't even know when it had started, nor did she know she was inside one. However, when she saw the demon bring in Lyrica is when she understood it was a test. If she was put into the same situation as Lyrica, she would choose to struggle till her death in order to not implicate her teammates. It was only a trial after all. It didn't matter in the sense that it's not a case of life and death. Not to mention, Shiro understood Lyrica well enough to know that she wouldn't be fixated by a trial so much so that she would implicate her teammates' chances. She was just like that after all. However, if it had turned out that Lyrica really was like that, picking trial over friends, then she could only blame herself for misjudging her character. Looking at Lyrica, Shiro narrowed her eyes as a question popped into her head. If the same situation happened in real life, would I still choose to kill the demons? She wondered. She was a selfish person in a way that she only had a look at things that interested her. Other things didn't matter. To her, Lyrica was one of the things that interested her, hence why she spent so much effort on her. However, she didn't think she would actively use her life to protect something that only interested her. As cold as it was, she could always move on in life and find more things that interested her. Of course, that was what she would have thought a while back. But now, the being that had interested her so far had evolved into something precious like family. Lyrica was almost like a child she watched grow up from her timid self, following her every step of the way. Shaking her head of these thoughts, Shiro smiled softly. No one knows what they would actually do in that situation. No matter what they say, no matter what they make themselves believe, no one is sure until the moment actually comes. She thought to herself, since she was the same. She could say that she was selfish and would preserve her own life, or she could say she was selfless and sacrifice herself. She could also say that she would make her own path and avoid both of these options. But nothing was certain. Goodness, this trial of the heart really messes with ya, she muttered whilst laying on her back. She was going to have a short nap whilst waiting for them to pass the test. Ah! Lyrica suddenly cried out in shock, waking up Shiro from her nap. You okay? Shiro asked with a frown. She could see Lyrica with a pink glow, meaning she passed, but she didn't look too well. She was currently sweating and touching her right shoulder for a reason unknown to Shiro. Turning around, she saw Shiro sitting on a rock and instantly went on guard. Shiro. Sup? Shiro replied casually. Tell me, do you like me? She asked with narrowed eyes. Like? Well, yeah, you're my friend. Shiro raised an eyebrow. Asterisk sigh. Lyrica sighed in relief as all strength left her body. Collapsing on the ground, she took a moment to calm herself down. I'm guessing the trial of heart did quite a number on you, Shiro asked, laying beside her. Trial of the heart? Lyrica asked as things started to become clear to her. Yeah, probably something like testing to see if you're suited to the path of the sword or some BS like it. Shiro shrugged. So it was all just a hallucination, Lyrica thought sadly. How long were you in the trial? Shiro asked curiously. She had to wait quite a long time for Lyrica to escape after all. About a month or maybe more. I'm not sure since I didn't keep track of time. What about you? Lyrica asked. Not even a day. Huh. Yeah, I killed everything and ended the trial quite quickly. Shiro yawned and prepared to nap once more to wait for Sylvia and Madison. What happened in your trial? Lyrica asked, curious as to why Shiro was able to get out so soon. Well, in the trial, Sylvia and Madison were eliminated from the cave, but you survived. But you were heavily injured, so I hid you somewhere and looked for medicine. Shiro said as she recounted what had happened. I found a pharmacy at the town, but it turns out to be a blood demon. I fought it and was about to kill it when they took you out and held you hostage. Shiro continued. What happened next? Well, I killed everything. Their impersonation of you was crap. Like hell I would mistake my friend for that fraud. Shiro rolled her eyes. Lyrica only smiled sadly at her response. In her own trial, she indulged herself for a month before finally realizing something was wrong. And yet, Shiro was able to tell what had happened on the first day. This only proved to her that she was too blinded by her own emotions to notice the change in Shiro's personality. She's not someone that would love another so easily, she thought to herself. Looking up, Shiro noticed a small change in Lyrica's eyes. Seems like the trial has matured her quite a bit, Shiro thought with a smile. She could tell that Lyrica would be harder to fool from this point on. Hey Lyrica, Shiro called out. Yeah? What's up? Why don't you rest for a bit? Shiro suggested. After the stress of such a trial, she knew one would need a decent rest. Sure. But before that, can I ask for a favor? Lyrica asked. Shoot. Can I borrow your thighs for a bit? As a pillow. Lyrica smiled whilst putting her hands together in a praying motion. Sure, why not? It's not too much of a problem. Shiro shrugged as she decided to indulge Lyrica a little. Lyrica smiled contently while resting her head on Shiro's thighs. Good night. Shiro smiled and patted Lyrica's head. Nodding slightly, Lyrica fell asleep. However, a problem started to occur after a while. This princess can't feel her legs anymore. F***CK. ####. Gah. Both Madison and Sylvia passed their test at the same time. Looking around in a panic, they calmed down seeing everyone else in the group. Seems like you guys have passed, Shiro said with a smile. Yeah, we have. Thought it looks like you two been having some private moments, Madison said with a small laugh. She could see Shiro lending her thighs for Lyrica to sleep on while patting her head at even intervals as if stroking a cat. Anything happen in the trial? Shiro asked, gesturing them to sit down near her. Nah, it was mostly just annoying. Though I still can't believe I only noticed after a long time, Madison lamented whilst sitting down next to Shiro. What about you, Sylvia? Pretty much the same. She smiled and sat down as well. Oh yeah, Sylvia. How did you even pass the cave trial? Wasn't there a small monster attacking you? Shiro asked as that had confused her. Oh, that. Well, I just kept healing and the monster ran out of stamina. I stabbed it after that. Sylvia rubbed the back of her head in embarrassment. Good job. Shiro smiled since tenacity was one of the healer's best traits. If you can't provide enough damage, the healer would still be healing after they tire you out. Plus, as a grand healer, Sylvia's mana pool and magic efficiency should be much higher than average. Man. Lyrica woke up hearing the commotion around her. You had a nice nap? Shiro asked with a smile. Ah yes. Lyrica nodded and sat up with a small blush. So shall we go to the next spot then? Madison suggested. Sure, but first, can we wait a while? Shiro asked. Why? Because this miss can't feel her legs right now. Never mind, I think I can feel. Oh my god, what the F***C? Shiro cried out, feeling a static shock through her legs with even the smallest movement. Looking at Shiro, who was trying her best not to move a single muscle, the trio looked at each other before smiling evilly. She's got pins and needles, doesn't she? Sylvia said with an eager grin. Yes, she does. Madison nodded. Shiro, who heard what they said, looked up and made eyes contact with them. "Hey, Shiro." "Yeah." Shiro replied through her gritted teeth. "Remember that day when you let a rabbit chase me?" "Yeah." "Well, let's say this is revenge." Sylvia grinned before poking Shiro's leg. "And carrot pound percent, and carrot dollar and carrot pound. Just you wait." Shiro cried out whilst trying to smack Sylvia's arm away with her hand. "No swearing," Sylvia said, poking her legs once more. While Sylvia was humoring herself with her long-awaited revenge, Madison and Lyrica decided to join in the fun. Shiro, who was subjected to this punishment, started to make plans for her own revenge. "Maybe I should take them into a level 55 dungeon during their sleep and wake them up near a spawning ground," she thought. The trio didn't know why, but they suddenly felt a shiver. Shrugging it off as cold wind, they continued to poke at Shiro's legs. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. After the trio had their fun with poking Shiro's legs, they continued their way to the other markers. "Well, anyways, there's 4 more spots near us, so we should check them out first," Shiro said, pointing at the map. "URG, I hope those are a little easier. I can't stand taking another one of those heart tests again." Madison groaned in annoyance. "Agreed." Lyrica nodded. "Well, don't worry about it too much. It's just a trial. If you really want to earn some decent treasure, I can teach you a bit of my martial arts and get one of my friends to make you some armor and weapons. No biggie." Shiro smiled. Both Madison and Lyrica's eyes glistened when they heard the suggestion. "I want to learn the third phantom," Madison replied almost immediately. If she was able to learn the principles behind the counterweight phantom, her tanking capabilities would shoot through the roof. "I want to learn second phantom," Lyrica followed up. Since her class was all about speed and attack, the second would be the most beneficial for her. That being said, first phantom was also a good choice, but she couldn't be greedy and ask her to share all of her skills now, could she? "What's this about phantoms?" Sylvia asked with curiosity. Lyrica and Madison looked at each other, unsure as to whether or not Shiro would want Sylvia to know. "You see, I use a set of martial arts called in-style phantom arts. There are 5 stances, I suppose, and each one has a different effect. The first one makes me almost undetectable, the second one makes me quick, third one allows me to redirect weight and force, the fourth one allows me to ignore defense, and the last one is all-out kill or be killed," Shiro said with a nonchalant smile. Since they were going to be teammates, it didn't matter if she knew about the martial arts, especially since she uses them all the time. "Hey, I didn't know you practiced martial arts," Sylvia replied in surprise. "Most mages don't practice a martial art, since they spend most of their time studying and learning spells. At least that was what she did in order to class up to a grand mage and learn support skills that buffed her teammates. Well, I don't actively learn martial arts. This was just a reward of sorts I earned from a trial I did." Shiro shrugged. They continued to chat for a bit longer whilst making their way to the next locations. Thankfully, the rest of the trials were just tests of strength that required them to fight bosses as a team. Naturally, the trials weren't easy either. However, Lyrica was practically carrying the team since she almost didn't allow Shiro to make a move. The sheer density and power behind her attacks allowed her to push some bosses on the defense. But even though she had improved massively, she was still lacking experience, which caused a few openings in her defense to show up. For those, it was up to Shiro and Madison to support her. While they were fighting the boss, Sylvia would help by healing them occasionally, allowing them to fight at peak power. Looking at Lyrica, Shiro was curious to know what had happened in her trial that caused her to improve on her swordplay so much. But she didn't pry into it so much since she could tell that Lyrica was avoiding questions that would ask her about what happened. The duo, Madison and Sylvia, also noticed this and dropped all questions regarding what had happened in Lyrica's trial. Looking up at the night sky, Shiro wondered about whether or not they should continue. "Do you girls want to rest for now and continue to the rest of the markers tomorrow?" Shiro asked. "Yeah, Lyrica's been fighting for quite a while now." Madison nodded. Since Shiro didn't have access to most of her inventory right now, she wasn't able to pull out a tent. "Honestly, the best thing to do is for us to just rest in the trees. That allows us to hide our bodies as well as staying away from ground ambush during sleep," Shiro suggested. Looking up at the trees, the group nodded without hesitation. After all, it wasn't strange for adventurers to camp out. A common occurrence. Looking for a good branch to sleep on, Shiro stretched her body out before relaxing herself. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. Repeating the same process as yesterday, the group fought their way through strength trials. Each of the subsequent bosses was much harder than before. It was to the point unless the three attackers worked together, it would be very hard to pass the trial. That was due to the fact that during some fights, they discovered that some bosses needed to be hit in certain spots at the same time, or else they won't die. Shiro tried to use Ascendant Dream to help her, but the defenses would react instantaneously, as if to stop her from attacking weak spots twice. She guessed this was the case since Lyrica and Madison were given a slight leeway in timing for them to hit the spots. However, even after they finished all of the markers, they still couldn't find the springs. You think the feeling you were getting leads to the springs? Shiro asked. Maybe. I mean, the feeling's grown stronger the more tests I've passed. What about you, Maddie? I don't have this feeling that you're talking about. Madison shrugged her shoulders in helplessness. Is that so? Lyrica replied with slight disappointment. Well, no harm in checking it out. Lead the way. Shiro smiled and gestured for Lyrica to lead the way. Following behind Lyrica, Shiro realized that the path they took should have taken them back to the start, but instead it was a different place. Strange. She thought to herself since she was confident in her ability to map out an area. For her map to collide with itself was definitely the first time in a long, long while. Plus, it wasn't as if they had walked up/down a hill either. However, she trusted Lyrica and didn't speak up. Graying out the area on her mental map, Shiro continued to edit it whilst walking behind Lyrica. It should be near now, Lyrica said, raising her guard so that she was ready for any kind of ambush that may happen. Hearing her call, the rest of the group also got ready. Leaving the forest behind them, they saw a huge temple. The temple was made from dark purple material. Cracks and other evidence of its age could be seen on the walls. Pillars were broken, and some bricks were even missing. Looking at the giant set of doors that displayed rows upon rows of engravings showing different swords, the group couldn't help but notice a spiritual entity that sat in front of the gate. After discovering a temple of sorts, you see an entity guarding the door to the temple. Rumors state that the entity is known as the Watcher. He tests the participants one last time before they're allowed into the springs. Seems like we're here, Shiro said, seriously, seeing an update in the trial quest log. Step forth, and I shall test you one last time. The Watcher said emotionlessly and turned around to face the girls. The girls looked at each other before nodding. They stepped forward towards the Watcher, but Shiro was forced back by a barrier. What's the meaning of this? Shiro frowned. Your capabilities far outmatch your friends. You shall take a separate test. The Watcher replied simply. Narrowing her eyes at his response, Shiro sighed. Well, good luck, girls. I'll be cheering you on. She smiled towards the trio. Thanks. They nodded before positioning themselves in front of the Watcher. Lyrica and Madison took the front lines while Sylvia stayed at the back with a dagger in hand. Tilting his head, the Watcher looked at Sylvia. How did you pass? Logically, you should not have passed with your lack of experience with bladed weapons. A peculiar situation, but nonetheless, let us start, he said with a shake of his head. Clicking his fingers, another sword appeared in his hands. Asterisk bang. Reacting on instinct, Lyrica was able to barely parry the slash to her neck. Madison widened her eyes in surprise before twisting her body and swung her great sword towards the Watcher. A simple flick of his wrist allowed him to deflect Madison's sword upwards, exposing a gap in her defenses. Burning Lotus, Lyrica shouted out, pushing the Watcher back and saving Madison in the process. Thanks, Madison said, retreating a little to regain her bearings. Lyrica only nodded simply before dashing towards the Watcher once more. Twirling her blade nimble along her body, she maximized the amount of power she could hold before slamming her sword into the ground. Asterisk boom. Fissures spread outwards, forcing the Watcher to jump upwards to avoid it. Maddie, Lyrica shouted out, but Madison was long prepared. Jumping up, Madison landed on Lyrica's blade, who twisted her body and catapulted Madison towards the Watcher. Magma erupted out of Madison's greatsword. Twisting her body, Madison started to increase her momentum. Crippling blow. Asterisk bang. Slamming the magma-covered greatsword against the Watcher's blade, Madison sent him flying towards the ground. However, he didn't stay for long as his body charged out of the crater and slashed towards Sylvia. Lyrica tried to dash back, but the Watcher threw a sword towards her, forcing her to parry it. "Sylvie!" Lyrica called out in worry. Sylvia narrowed her eyes and readied up her dagger. Bending her body backwards at an impressive angle, Sylvia was able to dodge the sword and subsequently slash the Watcher on the chest. Shiro was surprised at Sylvia's action. Her movement suggested the goal of dodging out of danger, but the way she had placed her dagger during that moment allowed her to sneak in a single attack as a bonus. Alphanuv es. Looking down at his chest wound, the Watcher shrugged his shoulders slightly as the wound closed itself up. Asterisk bang bang. Raising his sword behind him, he was able to block both Lyrica and Madison's attacks. "Examinee Sylvia has passed. Grade D," he said in a monotone voice. A golden glow encased Sylvia's body and sent her out of the arena. Sylvia was confused as to what had happened. "Congratulations," Shiro said with a small smile. "Thanks, I guess. Why did I pass?" Sylvia asked as she had so many questions floating in her head right now. "From what I can see, the Watcher will scale his strength so that it matches yours. Once you land a hit, you pass," Shiro replied. "But didn't Lyrica and Madison also hit him?" Sylvia questioned with a tilt of her head. "They didn't get a good hit in. The Watcher blocked it." Shiro shook her head. Hearing her response, Sylvia looked back at the arena and saw that it was true. The Watcher was able to block both of their attacks whilst countering with his own slashes. Demonic strength. Activating her berserk skill, Madison held her greatsword as if it was a normal one-handed sword and charged towards the Watcher. Asterisk bang crash. Her sword was able to overpower the Watcher and sent his sword flying across the area. However, even though she was able to overpower him, it left her open for an attack. Raising up his leg, the Watcher sent a devastating kick to her stomach. Gah! Madison's body was set flying back. Dashing towards her as quickly as possible, Lyrica gritted her teeth and caught her mid-flight. The force sent a shock through her body, but she endured. "You all right?" Lyrica asked, stabilizing their bodies. "Yeah, sorry." Madison nodded. She knew that last attack was a risky one that would open her up for an attack, but she still went for it. "Don't be too eager. Take your time," Shiro shouted out. "Bystanders should just watch." The Watcher frowned before clicking his fingers. A second barrier erected around the first one and stopped any sound from entering. "Tisk, stingy F *CK. Shiro cursed in annoyance. "Rose Blossom. Pierce," Lyrica commanded as she stabbed her blade forwards like a drill. Several rose thorns erupted around the Watcher and stabbed towards him at the same time. Grabbing his sword, the Watcher only smiled before slashing his sword downwards. Asterisk bang. A single swing of his sword caused a deep trench to form in the arena, as well as shatter all of Lyrica's thorns. Pivoting her body to the side, Lyrica avoided the slash and tried to uppercut the Watcher. However, her blade was pinched by his fingers just before it reached. With both his hands occupied, Madison appeared beside him and cleaved his sword arm off. Looking at his arm, the Watcher shrugged before sending out a pulse of mana that forced the duo to step back. "Examinee Madison has passed. Grade C+, the Watcher said whilst picking up his arm and reattached it. Similar to what had happened to Sylvia, Madison was encased with a golden glow and sent out of the arena. That only left Lyrica along to face off against the Watcher. "Now then, Chosen One, show me what you can do alone." The Watcher gestured for Lyrica to attack. Accepting the gesture, Lyrica dashed forwards and started to cross blades with the Watcher. Shiro, who spectated by the side, yawned a little since she could tell the Watcher was slightly biased towards Lyrica. While it was true that this was the last test, he was also training her. He would attack her weak spots, but decrease his speed enough so that Lyrica could react to them. Otherwise, she would have lost long ago. Since he called her the chosen one and whatnot, he probably wants her to be stronger. This training might take a while. Shiro thought to herself. The two of them continued to spar as Shiro got bored and decided to play around with her swords. Keeping her eye on the Watcher, she started to engrave his movements into her mind. It was the same process that she had used to learn Een-style phantom arts. She would record their movements into her mind and continuously simulate it until she got it right. Looking at his sword style, she could tell that it heavily emphasizes the point of attacking weak spots. Parry then attack weak spot. Sneak around then attack weak spot. Counter then attack once more. Wielding both swords in his hands, the Watcher continuously attacked Lyrica's weak points. Not saying a word, Shiro hopped from her branch and walked away. "Shiro?" Madison called out, curious as to why she suddenly started to walk away. "Don't worry, I'm just going to practice for a bit." Shiro smiled. Tapping her necklace, she summoned her swords and had them float as if two people were facing off against each other. Asterisk clang 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 clang. The four swords repeatedly collided with each other, with Shiro making small corrections to their course every so often. "Hey, don't you think that kinda looks like what the Watcher is doing?" Sylvia asked, pointing over at Shiro. "Now that you mention it, yeah, it does." Madison nodded her head slowly. However, since Shiro didn't know how much the Watcher was hiding in his sword style, she could only improvise in some aspects. Naturally, she could see the massive flaws in her improvisations, but she was never a swordsman to begin with. She used guns and giant fortresses rather than swords. But no one was born a master of their craft. If people could become grandmaster swordsmen, why couldn't she? She did become the apex after all. Copying 100% of the Watcher's sword arts will only limit myself, since me and him are different people. I can take inspiration, but I cannot just take everything. I need to mold it around my own fighting style. Shiro thought to herself. Asterisk clang 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 clang. The sword started to speed up as Shiro continuously analyzed her sword style to erase the flaws and instead replace them with opportunities. When she included the fact that she had the chance to remaster her full body control, she could be more adventurous with her martial arts. I can combine Een-style phantom arts to increase the lethality of this sword art. The phantom arts revolve around being almost undetectable as well as counter-attacking. Paired up with the Watcher's sword art that is all about attacking weak points, I'll be able to create a decent assassination-style sword art that is the extremity of attack-type martial arts. Shiro thought with an excited grin. The Watcher glanced over curiously as his instincts were telling him that something interesting was about to happen. However, when he looked over, his eyes widened in shock, seeing Shiro merging his sword arts into a mysterious martial arts. The two was strangely compatible as they both revolve around similar concepts. Asterisk dang. Where are you watching? Lyrica said with a frown as she slashed towards his head. The Watcher didn't reply, as he would spare some of his attention on Shiro. Moments passed as Shiro continued to refine her newly merged martial arts. It was in situations like this where her ability shined, since she could create several tens to hundreds of simulations for her new martial arts. How they would work, where it would fail. Through constant refinement, her martial arts became smoother with fewer flaws. Eventually, she stopped and retrieved the floating swords. She's done it. The Watcher muttered in disbelief. In his life, he had never seen talent like Shiro's. Even with the chosen one in front of him, he could tell that Shiro was unmatched. Which led to the question of why wasn't she chosen? Just a single glance at his sword arts allowed her to merge it together with her current martial arts. With such talent, surely she was more suitable when compared to the chosen one in front of him. Looking at her sword, Shiro smiled with pride. Een-style phantom arts has successfully merged with? Please name the new arts in 10 seconds, or the system shall give a suitable name. Surprise me. New skill set gained. Een-style Azura's Path. Title gained. Creator of Een-style Azura's Path. Creator of Een-style Azura's Path. Plus 20% damage and efficiency with Een-style Azura's Path. Plus 20% stealth. plus 20% critical chance when striking a weak spot. Ho Azura's path, huh? Shiro smiled. Knowledge on the newly evolved Azura's path appeared in her mind as she memorized them. Currently, there were only two stances in the martial arts: Phantom Path and Azura Sword Path. Phantom Path was basically an enhanced version of her original Phantom Arts, but she was slightly curious about the Azura Sword Path. I should test it out against the Watcher when I fight him, Shiro thought with anticipation. Looking back at the arena, she could see that both the Watcher and Lyrica were standing still. What happened? Shiro asked in confusion. The Watcher started to mutter to himself, so Lyrica paused for a bit. Madison replied. Huh? Lyrica, why didn't you attack him? Shiro asked, turning to Lyrica. I wanted to, but he blocked everything, Lyrica replied. She wanted to cry but had no tears. She tried to take advantage, but the Watcher only used one hand to keep her at bay, while he would mutter incoherently to himself. You, Shiro, did you just learn my sword arts just by looking at me? He asked seriously. Nope. Don't lie. I didn't. All I did was record your movements and get inspiration from them. Shiro shrugged her shoulders before hopping up on the tree branch. Frowning at her response, the Watcher turned back to Lyrica. You only have 5 more minutes to try to hit me. If you fail within that time, Chosen One, then you will be eliminated, he said impatiently. With such a good seedling and talent behind him, he didn't understand why he had to train the Chosen One in front of him, especially since the girl was clearly inferior to Shiro in his eyes. Seeing his stare that looked down on her, Lyrica gritted her teeth in frustration. She understood that gaze well. It was the gaze of someone who didn't expect anything of her. Just like the students before Shiro came, Lyrica thought to herself. Taking a deep breath, she remembered the help that Shiro had offered her and resolved herself to prove her worth no matter what. Rose Blossom, Heart Essence, Lyrica shouted out as flaming red aura burst out from her body. A hollow image of a rose started to blossom on her chest. The rose itself looked like it was made from glass as blood started to drip into the glass rose container. Narrowing her eyes, Lyrica bit her lip before spitting blood onto her blade. Rose Blossom, Blood Thorns. Blood runes started to spread out on her blade as thorns sprung out of the handle and wrapped around her forearms. However, she wasn't done yet. Thousand Blade Aura, Willow Tree Aura. Seeing Lyrica stack multiple skills together, Shiro smiled proudly. Even the Watcher became serious feeling Lyrica's change in aura. Time is ticking, Chosen One. Prove your worth.
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe.